Numa haere mai ki tēnei hui. Welcome to today's workshop on our long-term plan. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā, kena ki uta, kia mā, taratara ki tai, ehi, akia nā tātakura, he teo, he huka, he hauhu, tihei, mauri ora. Great to have everyone back in the room to look at the changes from last week and refine further the work on our long-term plan ahead of community consultation, although with a more immediate deadline, thinking about working with our auditors and having the material ready for auditing ahead of it going to the community. Today we're going to hear from staff and the reflections on the request from councillors last week and the options that now sit before us based on those conversations. And particularly around the optionality of things. Today isn't the last chance to change what the rating impact is going to be for 2024-25, but it is the last chance to think about the major things that sit within our consultation document because of the deadline to be able to send things to the auditor. That gives us the next 3-4 months to be able to do the refinement of work, to listen to the community and to take away and remove or add in anything that we might think is necessary. Sharon and I have also reflected on some of the conversations we've had with councillors about the level of detail and a keenness to understand a little bit more about what makes up some of the programs of work. And so there is a commitment from staff to be able to work through with councillors at the committee meetings that we've got between now and the hearings to understand that in more detail, and then following the hearings to adjust budgets should that need to be required in the deliberation stage before we set rates going forward. So acknowledge that for those of you who are new here, this is the only way that we've done it. For those that have been here before, there's that level of information that we've previously had will still come to us. It's just in over the next couple of months. Sharon, do you want to just add anything more to that?
Look, thanks, Sam. I think you've put that quite succinctly. In terms of we'll be bringing, we've put a slide into the pack, as you've seen, about when we're bringing the draft LTP. Today isn't about making some major changes because we do have the auditors coming in next week, and so we need that our structure to go forward. But as Sam absolutely says, we know we've got an infrastructure governance committee coming up. There will be a workshop that goes in advance of that, which will then speak to some of the projects. That gives a level of detail and helps new councillors catch up, because we know that many of these projects have been ongoing. So in terms of, we work on the principle that it's easier to take dollars out as it is to go in low and then try and add dollars in afterwards. So we're taking quite a sort of pragmatic view of that, and we ask you to share that pragmatism with us, because and you will see we've changed the language in the paper around this is what's budgeted into the LTP, so there's that absolute clarity, and thank you for your guidance on that, so the community understands that that's part of the 16%. But if you as governors decide, or the community feedback is such, then that can be pulled out, and there's other opportunities as we go. But Alison will cover a little bit of that off in the financials. So the key outcome for today is understanding that we wanted to talk through the changes that we've been made, what that would look like. We then need to take the document through to the auditors next week. We'll come on the 26th of March with the draft LTP document, go out for consultation throughout April. And through all of that, we will, as Sam says, use our governance meetings to get into a little bit more in-depth conversations, so that there continues to be opportunities to tweak what the LTP and what the rates looks like. And I appreciate that this is slightly different. We've started strategic. I think before you've started from bottom up. This is part of us being at that strategic level. So I appreciate that as a shift, and I apologise if I didn't explain that well enough at the start of this process, but it's part of our commitment to being in that strategic space.
Cool. And before we launch into some of the stuff, Sharon and I just had a meeting with the high school principals and Vice-Chancellor at Lincoln University and engagement with Canterbury University as well. And it was really interesting to hear the level of concern around the growth in our community and thought for our future was very similar to what we heard at the very beginning around the community feedback and engagement work that staff had done. And I thought it was good to reflect to you to say thank you for that work. And it was nice to hear from key community leaders and across our district that people want to move to Selwyn. That growth continues to be an issue for the schools themselves, but that's because people really want to be here, and people are moving all around the country because of Selwyn, and particularly what new things are around for them and the ability to not only live in a place but work in a place as well. And so the job and living together was a big part of it. We heard about recruitment actually becoming easier because of this place as a destination and people actually wanting to be here for the lifestyle option that was here. I guess a reiteration of things that we've heard before around, because we have led and continue, and some of that was leading with infrastructure to provide for housing, and more recently it's been leading with community facilities to mean that people can actually play in our district and enjoy the district and interact with one another. Those things have been hugely appreciated. So we didn't go into the full detail of the plan that we were talking, but they were very encouraging of us thinking about the future of Selwyn and the place that we want to hold for our community as we move forward. So thank you to the team for circulating the papers and giving us enough time to have a look through them over the weekend and then the days leading up to today. And I'll hand over to you to take us through the presentation.
Thanks, Sam, and afternoon all. Look, in terms of proposed approach for today, we've included a slide up the top of the pack in terms of those changes we've made after listening to you on the 24th of January. We'd like to focus on those changes rather than going right through the slide pack again, because you've seen most of this before. We'd also like to, instead of going right through and then going back again and addressing each of those points, we'd like to actually move through the presentation and try and land those issues that we still need to clarify with you as we go through the pack. So if that's okay with everyone, we'll kick off like that, and I'll hand over to Jenny.
Awesome, thank you. Good afternoon.
Sorry, Jen, before you start, I should have said Malcolm is unwell today and is an apology for the meeting. Sorry, Jen.
What I'm going to do is I will flick through the slides. I'll try not to go too fast so I don't get seasick, but just take you through the ones that we've changed and give you a little bit more narrative around that. Also, there's an opportunity to clarify any points that are unclear. I am just going to go down to the new slide that we introduced, and both Sharon and Sam have articulated the content of that slide actually quite well. And it's around the steps to create the LTP and where we're in the process, and also just hoping that this articulates for you all the opportunities that you'll get as we go through the different stages of the LTP process. In addition to the adoption of the consultation document, which we're looking at the 26th of March, you will have opportunities to see how that consultation document is developing in terms of content and look and feel, and other information that we might accompany that as we take the discussions to the community. So you will have that opportunity to see that as it develops. So without labouring it, today's around the just looking at what are the discussions that we want to take to the community, and what that looks like in terms of budgets and rates uplift. And that slide I will go through, won't need to go through. So really where we want to come to is the proposed big decisions. So what we've done since the last session is that we've refined our narrative to try and make the what we're positioning and what we're proposing a little bit more clearer to help you make decisions, but also just so that you can see how we may take these to the community as we go through the consultation process. The providing safe drinking water, from what we took from the discussion on the 24th, there are two ways that we could propose that to the community. So we wanted to provide you those two options so you could discuss that and agree how you may want to take that one forward, either as a big decision or either as a matter of community awareness. So we've got a couple of options around that. So moving forward, I thought what we could do is maybe go through one by one, and then we can maybe see and we can agree what we want to do with each one from there. So the chlorination discussion, this slide exactly the same as what's been presented previously. What we did take from the last conversation is to provide a bit more information and narrative around why we use chlorine and the costs around that, and why we're recommending what we are recommending in that space. So that's positioned as a big decision. We've also added in the water supplies, and that was something that was discussed at the last meeting as well, so we can be quite clear around that. And the slide around the big decision one, chlorination, that's the same. What we have done is that we've taken a view of how it could look if we use it as a community awareness piece, and the types of narrative that we would be bullet pointing. These are in bullet points at the moment, but the type of information we would provide under that scenario. So that's what we've done with chlorine, and I just want to see if there's any views or discussions, whether we take this, how we take this one forward.
Okay, thank you. This was one of the big things that got discussed last week. These are the two options about where it might sit. Thank you for the work to show us how that could look. Elizabeth.
Hi, thank you for that presentation. I'm just wondering, so we've got two options, which is status quo, chlorinate, option 2, apply for the 17 exemptions. I'm wondering if there's a middle ground that could be met with an option 3, which is to do what we're doing at the moment, which is to a staged approach. So we continue to apply for an exemption at a time, and we only progress if there's if we meet the criteria and we get some exemptions across the line. That's what we're doing at the moment. But just for the community reading this directly, you're basically telling them that we are going to, by hook or crook, if they come back and ask for option 2, we're going to apply for all 17. So I'm just wondering how we can bring that into sort of a slightly more realistic balance.
I suppose we have tried to simplify it by finding just two options. If we were to do it one by one, then we'd probably have to reduce that list down and say, over this LTP period, we're going to focus on the 3 lowest risk supplies and then come back for consultation the next LTP. So that's an option, but I think we're keen to hear the whole community's voice on that. And of course, the budgeted option is to carry on with status quo.
I just want to add in, Elizabeth, this is building on the foundations from the last long-term plan, where there was clear guidance given by the community around wanting to explore the chlorine exemptions, and in terms of, at the time, it was perhaps not apparent what the costs may be associated with that. And I think that kind of what we're saying, we're not saying that we're going to apply for each one by one. What we're saying is that in this LTP, we have a better understanding of what the cost and totality would be. And actually, that's what we're starting to share with our community, that building on the last long-term plan, if we continue down this pathway and there are 17 other schemes that could potentially receive an exemption, here is the totality and cost. And that's why we're seeking that guidance as to what the appetite, does the appetite still remain the same for people to pay more? And, I think we were quite clear as we've intentionally not put it into the budget. We're being clear that it's not in the budget. And if there's overwhelming feedback and the councillors decide that they want to continue, then this will be an additional cost on top.
Right.
I remain very strongly of the view that the community information is the best option. We are still in a state of flux around what water might look like, change of government, and there was no announcement on what the replacement of 3 waters might look like. Why would we get ahead of the curve and potentially put back ourselves into a corner? I'm always usually complaining about not going fast enough. This is the time when I think we should slow down, park this. At best, put community information in, but in 2 years' time, we'll know exactly the lay of the land around water services and water provision, and I just think we're creating a rod for our own back for no reason when we should control the clock, take our time, put it back, and let's see what happens.
Okay, thank you, Grant. Shane?
Tēnā rā tātou katoa, e kaihui e te waka tēnā koe, te rangatira, tēnā koe mana whenua. Kia ora. Yeah, in the deliberations last week, we had the same conversation. It was just unfortunate that the potential, well, I'm not going to say removal, but the decision to make it more information-based and not as part of a big decision was construed as potential lack of transparency. We've made the decision to chlorinate, and it was a painful one, and we've all expressed our opinions around chlorination. However, it's part of our community now, and it's our duty of care for our residents to keep them safe by applying for exemptions, should they be, and the cost associated, should they come back not needing chlorination. We'll still need to intermittent chlorinate anyway. So it's not removing chlorination from our systems altogether. It's actually proving a point and then still requiring for us to intermittent chlorinate. What isn't in part of this, but it's further on the document, is the government's direction on fluoridation. So it'd be interesting to see what infrastructure costs associated would require there. But I mean, this is a decision and a priority one as part of our long-term plan the last time. We've achieved that. That's now been achieved to a certain extent. And what should this be made part of information, which I think is absolutely transparent. What then takes its place in terms of priority is really the question. So I'm supportive of Grant's direction to make it fully public transparent, of course. Yeah, we're already there. So thank you.
Thanks, Shane. Sophie?
Yeah, I still think that it should be in the big decisions, just because it was such a huge topic of contention when it came through. And I know people, those who care deeply about this, will have their say regardless of whether it's in the big decisions or in the community information. But we said we'd go back and ask, and this is more clarity in terms of actually asking as opposed to indicating otherwise. That said, I really like this slide, and whichever pot it ends up at, whichever part of the document it comes into, I think that's valuable information to include. The only thing I was wondering is whether at the end, that last wee line there, about 231 a year on your rates, whether that needs to be clarified, whether it's just on people with reticulated drinking water supplies and for how many years. Because actually, if you think about it in terms of, if it's thinking decades, then that's a bit different for somebody to contemplate. And the only other note I've got there is, again, I think I said this last week, we know that the new government wants to replace the Labour's idea of three waters, or whatever it was they ended up calling it. That's still different to drinking water standards and the administration and regulation of drinking water standards. That's actually a totally different part of legislation. So I don't think we can think about the three water changes as being potentially impacting the drinking water supply. But to me, that they're actually quite separate. But thanks.
Thanks, Sophie. Nicole?
I agree with what Grant said. I think we're opening a big minefield that we actually can't do anything about. Sorry, Sophie, I can see where you're coming from. But for me, I don't know whether this is the case, but as far as I can see, this is just a Canterbury discussion. Elsewhere in New Zealand, it's not a discussion because they've been chlorinated for goodness knows how long. This is literally the only place that I've lived that wasn't chlorinated, and I was really surprised. Actually, it was a shock when I went with my kids to the dental nurse to find out that there was no fluoride in the water a year after we'd got here. So for me, the risk is too high. We are not looking to take it out, honestly, and if we're stepping through, we still haven't got confirmation that we've got require huts done. Every other supply has got more issues than this one. We're opening ourselves up in a big minefield. Rolleston and the likes of that, there is too many issues that can happen. It is really not a supply we even want to have, even contemplating taking the chlorine out. I think whatever it is, and as Sophie says, people are going to come and talk to us about it, but it's really not realistic for us to even put forward that this is a decision that we're looking to do, because we're not going to do this. We're not going to take the chlorine out if everyone comes and tells us this next LTP to take it out straight away. We're not going to do that. There was no intention to do that. So I think it's just got to be an information thing. Thanks.
Thanks, Nicole. Lydia.
I'm just looking at this and I'm just trying to weigh up, I guess, my decision on it. If it's in community matters, how do we portray the rates impact a little bit better? Because I feel like it is almost a little bit lost. Whereas like our option one, the budgeted option, is no current changes to rates. But yeah, so, pardon? So yeah, I mean, I'm just wondering for our community, just for transparency, is there a better way that we can communicate it if it's in community matters?
I think we could add a line there saying that if chlorine was to be removed and go towards intermittent chlorine, this would be the rates effect. So make it very clear the decision is to leave chlorine in, but if we were to the alternative, this is what it would be. Yep, so we could add that line.
Thanks, Lydia. Megan.
I have a question and a comment, but I'll put my comment first. So my comment would be, if engagement around option 1 and 2 is disingenuous, then why do it? So that just builds off your statement, Nicole. So if option 2 is real and that we do want to hear from the community and take these steps, because it doesn't just say apply for exemptions, it goes on to say, and if granted, begin removal. So that's one comment. I would rather see it in keeping the community informed if there's been prior decisions made by the council already before my time that makes it really clear that chlorination is not an option. But my question is around the amount. So option 2 says 231 per year estimated rates impact. Is that, and I'm sure it was laid out last time, so if I've missed it, sorry, but is that to apply for the exemptions plus removal, not just the application? So it's the total cost if we moved ahead and removed everything.
Correct. So that covers the cost of applying for the exemption and then also implementing the improvement capital works to achieve that. So this is a debt-funded program. So that $231 is not a one hit. That's every year for the foreseeable future, in addition to your rates.
Right, and
it's for both the applications and the capital works to achieve that.
And in the consultation document, would it make that part clear? And also, I'm anticipating that there'll be, you don't know what you don't know. There's got to be a budget for the issues that arise through removal. So, yeah, that was my question. Thank you.
Thanks, Megan. And probably on the first piece, we haven't had the decision of should we take the chlorine out or not. We've only asked the question, could we take the chlorine out? And that's going through the exemption process with Te Mata Arawai at the moment to find out whether we even can. The decision on whether we should take the chlorine out or not, we haven't debated or decided, but we have told the community we would follow an exemption process, which is why this is currently sitting, why it came to us from staff as a big decision, because that was what we've currently told them through previous consultation. Deborah.
Thank you. I'm looking at the $231 for the second option, and the first option is no change in the rating. However, if we actually jump forward to page 38 of Finance of Targeted Rates, when I go down to water, LTP first year 24-25, am I reading that that's a 20% increase on currently what we are currently charging? And if we are, how can we say that no impact on rates? Because 20% and then coming down to 15%, and then 6 and 6 and 6, but that's normally concentrate on the high numbers because they're the figures that we have readily available. I can guarantee that those 6 won't stay at 6. Just curious as to how I'm supposed to read the finance and the targeted rate increases and suddenly have a document in front of me saying no change to the rate. And
So
then,
what it's saying is in this particular case, it's looking at that one decision. So in terms of that one decision, if we choose to remain with chlorine in the system, then there's no additional changes to the rate because of that decision. But if you want to make a decision to go intermittent, then that's the increase in that. This is only one decision. There's plenty of other upgrades and work that we need to do to meet regulation and cost increases of supply materials, and that's what's driving the costs and that you're referring to later on in the document. So that's the business as usual cost increase, increase in materials, contracting, electricity, insurance, all those sort of things. That's the cost increase that you're seeing.
thank you, because when we often talk about our rating increase, we only generally apply it to the general rate, and you look at all the targeted rates and what people are paying in the UAGC up to the maximum, and you start adding all of those on to what what our ratepayers are going to end up paying. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Thanks, Deborah. And some of this was discussed last week around that language, and I thought we talked about having no increase from proposed rates, so that we're talking still about a future state. It's not the current state. It's what we've got in the document that talks about the proposed lifts. So if we go with that option, we'll just need to think about that wording to convey and clarify what Deborah's asked. Elizabeth.
I'll try a second time around. So we've got 17 exemptions to apply for. If I was the community reading this document, I would think that you're going to put all 17 exemptions in at once. At the moment, however, we're not doing that. Are we going to continue with the staggered approach? If they're paying a $231 a year targeted rates to apply for the 17 exemptions, but if we say put 3 exemptions or even put 10 exemptions in and they're all refused, do we continue going down that line? Like the community's expectations are going to come back to us as councillors and say, we're reading in the Selwyn Times that all 10 exemptions have been refused. It's crazy to keep targeting rating us for the ongoing, where do we draw the line? I feel there's not enough clarity to the community about how and what our expectations are around applying for the exemptions. And if they are declined, then will that targeted rate be removed?
Yes. So to expand on that, we won't be applying for all exemptions at once because the amount of work that's required for each exemption is quite significant. So we would apply on the basis of the order that's proposed in that presentation. If we come across that the exemptions are being declined one after the other, then we would be looking at stopping that rate, which is the yes part of that response. So council would go through that process, and once we're seeing that we're not getting the exemption anymore, we'll come back to council. I would expect you to make the decision to stop that additional rate and draw the line there. Yeah. To be clear, it's staff's recommendation that we continue with chlorination. So that's staff's recommendation. No, that's probably all I need to say about that. I'll leave it there.
Thank you. So I've heard a couple of views about whether this sits in the front end or the back end. So those that haven't given a view wants to give one. At the moment, it's going to be in the back end because there's a couple of speakers more that have spoken about it being and keeping the community informed. Has anyone got a different view or wants to speak to keep it at the front end of the document? You'd like to keep it at the front?
It's a workshop. Yeah, it would be helpful, but it's not a decision making because it's when it comes through to the final draft consultation plan. You could have a vote there. It would be just really handy if we have some strong guidance from you
I think we can use a show of hands as a way of giving guidance to staff. It's not a decision
Sure.
on the outcome that will affect the community at this point because it's just for consultation. So those that want to keep it at the front end of the document as a big decision, please raise your hand. And those that want to have it at the back end of the document as a community information matter, please raise your hand. Yeah, so we'll keep it at the back. We'll move it to the back, sorry.
Thank you.
Thanks for that. Can we also, on that matter, have on the slide there, if we're keeping it at the back, it doesn't explicitly say we will no longer apply for any further exemptions. That is the outcome. If we go with this, or when we go with this, that is the outcome. So I think we need to be clear with the community, and that will then inform their submissions to us. Okay.
Thank you. I'll take us down to the next one, which was the public transport decision. What we've done with this slide is that we've just created a more clearer narrative. Predominantly it's around our role, Selwyn District Council, and ECAN's role. So there's nothing major more for me to socialise on that. I just wanted to see if there's a call around this being a big decision.
Elizabeth.
I'm a really big advocate for park and rides. I am looking, I mean, the targeted rates do not look too horrendous except for option 2, which we could end up with, which is option 2. What do we do if the submissions come in and say to us, well, actually, we think Wollaston's already got one, we don't need it there, well, let's prioritise Lincoln to reduce our rates. Because years 4 to 10, that's $38.63, which might be significant for some people. I guess this is me just understanding with the LTP how we can have options within options.
So at the end of the hearing, at the end of the hearing process, so we'll have all the submissions and we'll run through the hearings for people to come and speak to us. And then we'll have a series of days of deliberation, which will then run through each of the matters that sits within the LTP, and we'll decide what the final outcome is. So the ability at that point to go, we'd like most of what we already had, but we've heard we need to shift this or move that round. That will be a decision of councillors in May, I think, is when we've got that scheduled. Nicole.
I think it looks good. It's explaining things. Just option 1, we might be wanting to do a park and ride as opposed to a rack and ride, but other than that, I think it's good.
Thanks, Nicole. Interesting that this was one of the big things that came through from the community at the very beginning of this process, and this was also one of the things the schools talked about, young people being able to get around our district, and particularly connecting our small towns, which this doesn't particularly address, but the public transport connections between our towns and so on was something that they have just brought up. Thanks, Nicole, for that, and there's no further changes needed to that piece.
Thank you very much. Okay, moving on to the big decisions 3 and 4 that we currently have proposed. So the key changes you would have seen from what we presented last week. Firstly is we've put an additional narrative to explain how the hub and network approach works, which is a slide I have up at the moment. And then we've also tried to update the narrative around what we're proposing in terms of community facilities and what we're doing in each of the areas, or what we're proposing we do in each of the areas under this LTP. Also noting for the buildings that we're saying that we'd like to do further investigation work on, we've outlined there what years we've currently have them in for building within the LTP, if they would go to head. The options on all 3 projects have not changed, but what we have done is applied the DCs and looked at adjusting the rates based on actually having that development contributions. So we've updated those as well. So that's a very brief very quick run through. And I suppose maybe we sort of go to the big decisions, and the first one is Whātaro. and still taking that out to the community is a big decision. The options I do note are the ones that we brought to council back in November, and those were the ones that were agreed to take forward. And I might leave it with you, Sam.
Great.
Thanks.
Nicole.
I'm not sure if this was in the previous one, but the heading for Rolleston and Springswood is central. Why have we used central instead of Rolleston? I mean, I know it was Selwyn Central before, but it's not what it is now, which might confuse things.
Especially since they have
Noted, and we'll change that.
Thanks.
Thanks, Nicole. Deborah.
Just with regards to the community facilities, are we discussing the community facility progression program as well on page 21, or are we doing it page by page? Oh, we've got that one up anyway. Can I please have an explanation? When I'm looking at project costs, I'm looking at a variation, option 2, our budgeted option, project costs. So our budgeted option is estimates at 44 and then another 53, which is $10 per ratepayer, shall we say, incrementally. So that's a variation of $3.5 million on projected costs. If I was sitting here reading this, I'd say, well, you know, where's the uncertainty? Why don't we always look at taking the higher costs and being realistic about what this is going to cost, instead of trying to maybe soften the blow and say, oh, maybe we can, you know, have a discussion around it costing 16 million. The design still doesn't, the design doesn't change, but mentally and psychologically, it does change with regards to, you know, $3.5 million is a big variation on these projects. And it's not the only one that's sitting there looking at those sorts of variations. It's also for our other projects as well. So I'm just really curious about why we've got that variation, because that much of a variation will impact on our rates. Incrementally, it will, you know, might be just 1%.
Can I just,
but it will impact.
Just in response to that, that's a good point, and it would be, and on that basis, it would be good to come in under budget, and so going with the higher figure gives at least a ballpark. I guess the reality is that until we get into detailed design, which we haven't yet done because of the cost involved and the uncertainty, we wouldn't be able to have those figures more precise, but happy to take your guidance around it being the higher figure then, recognising that it may come in slightly lower.
Thanks, Deborah. And I think based on the conversations that we've had over the last 6 months particularly, that would be a preferred option from councillors, but happy to take some further feedback on that, because we've had a few cases where we've started projects and then, you know, 2 years in we need another $2 million, and all of a sudden we're having another conversation about it. Thank you. Elizabeth.
2 points. The first one is the existing building in poor condition likely need to further significant upgrades to be used in 2035 onwards. Is it a potential to change it from significant upgrades to bringing it up to code? Just changing the word, just to give people a greater understanding of why we're not bringing it up to code within the option 1 option, because that's, at the moment we're only giving one option for option 1, and that's a short-term use of that building. We're not looking at the full long-term option, because that was what was taken out earlier. Also with the costs and the project costs here, does that also include the demolition costs for this existing building that we've talked about in option 1 and all of those option project costs?
If I could just reply to that, we don't know whether or not, in terms of if you're talking about option 1, that there is a demolition involved. There might be alternative uses for that land and the property that's on it. And I take your point in terms of it does just extend it for a limited time, and whether that's about how we describe that or something different. I guess our sense of that was that we think that until we do some of that investigation and do some of that upgrade, we're not exactly sure of what level of timing, extra time that will allow us. And also there's a lot of other, there are other options to be explored. So would it make you more comfortable if we looked at trying to readjust the wording slightly so that it does signal that it may not be the end of the costs. They'll be revisited in a future LTP process, something similar.
Cool, thank you. Shane.
Kia ora, Sam, ngamihi. Tēnā koe te ingoa o Waihora Whatarau, te rangatira o Ngaitirui Hiki, ngamihi. The page 19, it was great, and I listened to some of the deliberations last week asking for the existing facilities and services, and Council for a long time has strived for the hub and spoke model of services throughout the district, and I guess what isn't in it is the why. Why is it Leeston's turn, or why is it this project up now, and the priority of things? And it's been a 15-year project to get to this point here. So, why? What is the purpose of building a facility like this? What's the rationale? And we're building these facilities across the district for district-wide use for all of our residents and people to feel connected not only to council but also to their culture. So as part of that page, I was just thinking, it doesn't have, and you've already mentioned it, the age of the facilities, the potential for what is to come with some of these facilities into the future, and what are we striving for in terms of that hub and spoke approach. Last night, Grant, Councillor Miller and myself, and unfortunately Councillor Monk was an apology for a community meeting that we're invited to, a pre-meeting almost. The community has, I guess there was just a sense of, and it's really unfortunate, there's a sense of a lack of trust through the current journey that's taken place. But I think with the options that are presented, there's opportunity to refresh that. We've got a refreshed, realigned council now that are focused on good relationships. So the discussions last night sort of centered around different opinions of those in the room from the community, and I think personally that the options that are presented covered a lot of perhaps the differences. What clearly came through was the potential to work again with a rugby club, and building a facility with a aged facility behind it really isn't what council should be about. So the potential to looking forward, perhaps slow this process down for the community to be more involved, and the connection for our council to be reunited, I guess, refreshed, and visit some of the discussions from the past to work forward. I'm comfortable with some of the decisions there, but it's really about with the options provided. But it's really about the process and how we proceed from here, how we stage both developments. To me, it's almost the one development really. The park and the community facility it's really one. It's one development that's come around for the next 50 years. Really, there's been not much investment into this particular community that I'm representing for the last 25 years. So as some of the discussion last week, and as governors, we must remain open-minded and not make a decision until we have all of the information in front of us. The conversation last night, I think there will be an invitation for councillors to attend, and also a point of mana whenua being part of that community as well, and also being invited. So perhaps my colleagues have more to say.
Just in response to that, you make a good point about the why, and we can include the why, which we have spoken to previously, but you're quite correct. It didn't explain that in the wording, and so therefore it's not clear that council has already previously agreed to this building based on a needs analysis, and it can also recognise that some of the infrastructure is the other facilities are older. So we can certainly do that. In terms of the opportunity for the likes of, it's good to hear that there's opportunities to revisit some previous conversations. And I guess I would just highlight that's the value of the consultation process. And there's every opportunity to, as part of that consultation process, going and speaking to interested community groups and encouraging them to invite us to revisit or to put in submissions that reflect that they have got a different position than perhaps they have currently. That would be incredibly useful, and that is the value of the process. The only other bit that I would rely on others to comment on is if you want to now, if you're proposing to merge the two projects back together, that would, I guess, our approach was to separate it, and so that we get a sense of what it is that the community values, and so we can meaningfully consider a more staged approach, for example, that might allow some progress to be made, although it might not meet, some expectations. So that was the intent. I don't know if that's back on for revisiting it to merge it together. I don't think that would be the staff's advice.
Thank you. Thanks, Shane, and for those responses. Megan?
My only comment is around 2. If we're going to go with the 19 million cost rather than 16, then 3 will need to be rescoped, because 3 saying everything in 2 plus some. And also 4 is, on my reading, slightly unclear. It's saying, when I read it, it says the same but different. And the part that's different is what I don't understand about 4. So I wonder if it could be clearer what's the same and what's different.
Good point.
That's a good point in terms of option 3, definitely. And we can work on some wording around option 4. Yep.
Thank you. Grant?
There's a couple of things, well, 3 things really. I think the first thing is providing clarity to the people who are not in Ellesmere what the community facility is. It is a library and community space. And it's not clear in here that that is what it is. It just says community facility, which most people would say that's a hall. So they don't know it's actually a joined up facility. I think clarity around Whātaro, is that the concept design, or is Whātaro the vision? It's the name for the project. Because if it's the name for the project, and it could be the building itself could be changed substantially, great, fantastic. But if a Whātaro is the triangular design currently on design, then the wording needs changing, because the options don't allow flexibility. So I guess if you could clarify that for a start off, that would be helpful.
So point noted in terms of increased clarity around your first point, around it being a library and community centre. And for the purpose of clarity, it is whatever gets built will be called Whātaro.
Okay. So
and it doesn't determine the design, which goes back to some of that earlier conversation, is does the cultural narrative require it to be a triangle-shaped building? And the answer is no, definitely not. That was an architect's decision based on the cultural narrative. It's not a requirement.
Because unfortunately, as it stands, the community believes Whātaro is the triangle, and I think that's really clarity is required there. This is the vision, this is the theme, but what falls out of that theme might be completely different, and it needs to be absolutely clear what that is. And picking up Megan's point, number 4 could be just as simple as build a new community facility next to Leeston Park, including sports courts and or bigger community spaces, which is a very catch-all generic term.
The 15 million.
With a budget, so it may be that you attach a budget to it, but I think we've already agreed Whātaro is the vision in my view. But thanks for clarity, because I think it's really, really important. Just to sort of add to what Shane is saying, you know, I was really pleased to go to the meeting last night as an outside councillor, not of that ward, but as a Selwyn district councillor. The feeling of frustration was palpable. You could almost reach in the room and grab it. And the great thing that we've got here as a council is the opportunity. We haven't poured an ounce of concrete, so all is not lost. You know, we've still got the chance to make something really great and deliver a future for the Leaston, which is what the community wants, but it's also within a budget that we can cope with. So I think somehow or other through this process, through the LTP process, we've got to be re-engaged. And one of the real benefits, I think, of what we've got to now is that, for better or worse, we've united the community, which probably not the ideal way to do it, but we've managed to do it by the way we've got to where we are. And so there's a groundswell of desire to engage with as a community with Selwyn again. So that's what I'd encourage out of this process, is keeping a very open mind and looking to what the community wants. So if that's the clarity you provided me, gives the 4 options are certainly work. Tara?
Yeah, thank you. Just a wee reminder that what is in front of you came out of a workshop from councillors and what you endorsed for us to bring forward. So I acknowledge you're making some changes, but actually we brought this through after a workshop and after your guidance. So this isn't stuff we've made up randomly.
No, I mean, to me now, the clarity that you've given me, it doesn't need changing, because it's the vision's there.
Yeah.
What comes out of it will be slightly different.
And second,
could be different. It could be the same.
yeah, and secondly, just to advise, I'm really proud of the team in terms of bringing it back to the workshop, because they've spent as little money as possible and they've put the hold on bringing this forward for greater consultation, which, Grant, feeds into what you're saying as well, is that all is not lost, because the team recognised that we needed to have further conversations, which is what we've done through this. So yeah, I think we're all getting there and getting onto the same page.
I think the discussion was, in a nutshell, it's time for us to control the clock rather than us being driven by the clock. To get it right, it's better to take a wee bit of time and get it right rather than rush to get an outcome driven by time.
Thanks, Grant, for that. Can I just check in that conversation, option 2, when we say build the new Whātaro facility next to Leaston Park, if that's the one that gets endorsed through the consultation, because people read that as build the triangle facility as designed, is that what we will all understand that as being, if that comes back as 2, or as what we've just said, there's scope for 2 to be something different? Because otherwise we might need just to change that language, because at the moment that reads continue down the path of a triangle building as designed.
I think there's scope to explore that in terms of that, but and we'll look at the languaging around how we describe that.
Just to finish that off, Sam, it is important what you're saying, because if you're going to do that, you need to put that design in the LTP with where it's going to be placed, location, so there is comprehensive understanding of what that means.
Yeah, so there just might need to be a further, sorry, there just might need to be a further option in there, or some extra explanation around what that can look like, so that there's actual understanding of when people say yes to something, what they're actually saying yes to. Deborah.
Sorry, just a correction on page 19. Mead Hall is in Ellesmere. It's not in Central and Springs. Forgot to mention that one.
I think we've picked up that and fixed it in the PowerPoint, but you did get sent the incorrect slide. So thank you. That feedback's been received and taken on board.
Microphone, Deborah.
While I'm here, we've just discussed 3A. Now we have 3B. And I guess the issue is...
Deborah, we're going to come to 3B,
okay.
Unless you want to link it into this conversation, but we will come to 3B.
I just think it looks fragmented. I think it needs to be linked, that these are 2 different projects at 2 different costings, to be really clear.
Yep, and that's why they're 3A and 3B, so they are different and they are clear, and there is budgets with them. I probably should have waited to the end of the conversation to raise what I just raised. But I think that we want to continue. There's no challenge to wanting to follow the cultural narrative and deliver a building that sits on the land and respects heritage well. So maybe 4 could reflect that a little more. And that way, when people are giving us the feedback, we can change the words. So the 2 is explicitly the building as designed, and 4 becomes something new, but is about honouring the cultural narrative and work that's been done without the specifics of the building shape as it currently sits. And that way, we can use the same options that currently sit there, but we're not. Option 4 isn't something random that doesn't fit well with the cultural understanding that's already there. Sophie?
Yeah, 2 things. One was just from this conversation, the phrase "all is not lost." There's one I'm glad the conversation's kind of moved on from there, because that kind of framed option 2 as dreadful, which it's not, and a lot of work's gone into that. So it just felt like an inappropriate phrase, even if it's anyway. So the only other thing I wanted to suggest was, and this is kind of broad for everywhere, last LTP, which was the only one I've ever been through before, when we were asking about particular community facilities, like at the time there was Leaston, Prebbleton, Darfield sort of stuff, quite a lot of the responses came back with, that's a question for the people who live there, which was kind of interesting. And then people just put no response. It was like they didn't realise that they would be helping to pay for this regardless of which township it was going to be located in and who the usual users might be. So it is kind of a generalised comment. I'm not sure how we can put that more clear, because rates, it does, it doesn't necessarily explicitly tell somebody that, but at the same time, I'm not sure how best to explain it, but I'd feel a bit upset if more people still don't realise that we have a rate that covers everybody for this stuff, not just the people who live within 2K of it.
It's a good point, and it could potentially be wrapped up into some of the more general commentary around how the rates, where they come from, and et cetera, so we can definitely pick up on that.
Thank you.
Phil?
I just need to clarify a couple of things as I'm reading option 2, 3 and 4. Option 1's clear. Yeah, 2, 3 and 4. Option 3, I know we've debated this before, and I'm patronizing, if you play along with me for a moment. Option 3 is saying, which is option 2 with some additional sports fields, yeah? And option 4 is something different, as you were saying before, with the cultural narrative. Aren't we, if the wording isn't really careful in the LTP consultation document, we're naturally pushing people towards 3 or 4, and they'll say to us, "Why is 2 your narrative, your preferred, when 3 is better and 4 is better and cheaper?" So I guess it needs to be a frame better.
We've moved away from preferred option. You will note we've used the word budgeted option, and the intention behind that is reflecting on what Deborah said, is because there's a higher cost, and that is what is budgeted. So if community, so that's all we're simply saying is that's the budgeted option.
I think what will happen is that the numbers will play a much greater part in people's decisions, and they'll go, look, number 4 is $4 million cheaper, and I'm getting something that's better.
That's noted. I think it would be fair to say the staff themselves struggled a little bit when the council made that decision and gave us that guidance. And so it's possible to pull that option out and give, I'm talking about option 4, which people are seeming to struggle with, that it is still possible to pull out option 4 as an option.
I don't think that's what's being asked, okay. Denise.
Well, I guess if that's not what's going to happen, it needs to be really clarified in the narrative. That's all. I was reading them going, well, I'd be going for number 4 if I was doing the consultation document, when I do the consultation document.
And that's fine, because that's what the community might come back and tell us. So the fact is there's options there for them to make that decision. It's whether we've got enough information here for people to make as an informed decision as they can on the basis of what was shared. Megan.
Thanks. So I acknowledge that this conversation has been had numerous times and we're still landing at a point, but it's good to have it if there's still unclarity. And it's raised something for me that I should have picked up on earlier. It's been clarified today that the building's going to be called whatarau because it's been gifted, and what it will look like might be different. And options 2 and 3 say build the new whatarau facility, whereas option 4 says build a new community facility.
Yeah.
And I think that does actually indicate something different. So could we call it just whatever it's going to be from the start? So what I mean by that is, can we just say option 4 is build a new whatarau facility as well?
What
Yeah.
you designed.
Yes, noted.
Thanks.
Yep.
Thanks, Megan. Elizabeth.
Just quickly wanted to check in, Denise, so following on what you were saying, with our budgeted option, is there potentially an asterisk that could be put there and a key down the bottom to explain what our budgeted option just very simply means when people read that?
I think I took from that conversation a bit more information needs to be included in the full document about what the current design is, so that people are aware of. So when we refer to the current design whatarau, and that they know what they're talking about.
And the whole document. The whole document will refer to our budgeted option, and so it won't be just for this. There'll be how to read this document right at the very front of it, which will then allow people to understand what that really means. So we don't want to repeat it on every page. It'll be at the front end. Okay, we've landed somewhere. You've heard what we've said. You know what you're going to print.
Correct.
Excellent.
But I take it we keep it as a big decision.
Still a big decision.
Still a big decision.
4
So,
options and some word changes.
4 options and some word changes.
Yep.
We can do that, and there'll be an opportunity to see that again.
Thank you. 3B.
How that's framed, how we're framing it up. So we have next is the Leaston Park, which we're still proposing as a big decision as part of this LTP. It can be either linked with whatarau or it could be decoupled. We're taking the option to keep them separate because they are separate projects on their own. So really, Sam, once again, I just want to see if we are keen to keep this as a big decision as part of the LTP.
Deborah.
Just doing some cost analysis with regards to the project. For example, if we go back, we look at option 3, which has additional sports courts or bigger community facility at 18.42 million, and then we go to option 4 at 15. If we choose our option 2 for the Leaston Park and we add that in, comes back down to 18 million. Just sort of trying to balance the book somewhere along the lines with regards to what the actual cost is going to end up, costing our ratepayers at the end of the day. But I'm just really curious because we have just passed a policy or a major document through Mark Rikers, and it was a strategy of parks and recs with regards to lighting, field development. Whole lot of cost structures were in there. Now, I'm assuming that because we passed that as a policy document, that has to be costed somewhere within this LTP process incrementally over the next 10 years. And I'm just wondering if that's built in over the next 10 years as the adoption of that policy document.
Sorry, it's a strategy document, not a policy document.
Are we not double dipping with regards to costing these projects out separately when we already have a process that we have to actually itemise or carry out on a time frame, because it was all in the document that Mark Rikers presented and we adopted it with regards to what it was going to cost. And I just want clarification around how we are dealing with these two documents and the funding requirements in our LTP.
So the outcome of the strategy, those budgets are included in this long-term plan. So the funding of the outcomes sought by the strategy is budgeted for. If we come to the consultation and the budget option is, I suppose, has no support and the community wants option one to reach the budget, then we'll reduce that particular part of the budget. But we're not going out for consultation for every single part of the strategy. We're going out for the key items, and this is one of those key items in the strategy which we're going to bring to the community's attention and ask for their opinions on.
So, just conscious of the time frame that was mentioned in the strategy with regards to setting the times for our other community facilities across our district. And I'm just wondering, it mentioned footpaths and play equipment, etc. And we've got it in here, so we're choosing one project out of that and bringing it forward and putting that in front of us. This is how it's being viewed for regards to Leaston Park. So where does it fit within the timeline of all those other projects within our community? That does it get them pushed out on a cost-effective basis when we come to deliberations?
So I think the options are either to do nothing or to do something, and depending on the community's opinions and then council's deliberation, we'll either leave it in the LT where it is, or we will take it out. So there's either it's a binary decision. Is it option? Well, is it in or is it out? Is it option one or is it option 2 and 3? It's a decision the council will need to make. There is room to adjust phasing of the other projects in the LTP, but I don't think that will be necessary.
Phil, is this option 2, which is the budgeted option, has no rating impact? Why do we need to go to further consultation on this?
So as part of the previous budgeting process we've been through, we are being rating for that 3.4, so that's why there's no additional impact on the rates. However, the community may come back and say, well, actually, we really buy into this master plan. We'd rather spend the additional money and do the whole lot. In that case, will be additional funds that need to be collected from the ratepayers.
So really option 3 is the one that we will want to get across the...
Yep, so that will be interesting what people say. They might say, listen, actually, we're happy with the reserve as it is. Let's go for option 1. Let's not spend any, let's actually reduce the rating impact. Or they might say, well, actually, let's go to option 3 and pay a bit more, but get more for that option.
And this is language again that should say included in proposed rates, or included in proposed whatever we're doing, because it's not actually in the current rates at all. So we just need to check some of the language around some of the other bits as well to make sure we've got that correct, because there is a lift in the cost.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to think that 143 is included in the rates, and 3.4 million is also included in the rates.
Thanks, Phil. Shane.
Kia ora, Sam. Thank you very much. Whilst I think that the options provided cover not only the council's expectations but community options, we're today deciding on options to send out for consultation with our constituents who will make the decision or their preferred preference dependent on their feedback. I just wanted to point out whātaro is the name gifted, and this is the our kōrero ahurea from the library, and whātaro is the name gifted for the facility which will house the library and community activities. Waihora whātaro is the name given for the overall Leaston Township project, and the meaning, the 100 platforms of waihora, or the abundance, and I think it's a beautiful kōrero on partnership, but also a network-wide development that we can share as a district together through our cultural narrative. So it's about providing level of services and facilities across for everybody to share and be a part of. So yes, I think the options here so provide enough for our community to come back with what is desired, and we'll make that decision. And whilst there is linkages, I understand the separate budgets, so therefore the separate A and B decision-making processes. So one of the conversations that occurred last night with the rugby club was around the facilities and council's conversations in the past around the leaving an age facility and then investing in new parts around it. And one of the parts was around the toilets and footpaths and that sort of thing. And certainly our senior population there would love nice flat footpaths, although they've got one out to Doyleston and back now. They have to drive the car there to get there. So in previous conversations, there's been quartered all around the heart, and creating a centre of life that's accessible, that's walkable for our seniors, and they can share in some of the lovely other facilities that are based around our district. And it's, to me, it's about sharing the love around the district, and it's just come at this point in time where it's this community's turn. So I think through the ongoing decisions that will be made, the opportunity to then re-engage with the rugby club, or the potential for sports, Ellesmere Sports Centre possibly should be part of that discussion moving forward. So, kia ora. Thank you for the mahi.
Thanks, Shane. Grant?
Shane's question sort of triggered a question, and it may be not required, but earlier on we talked about the clarity between the library and the community centre part of it. Does that go as far as, should we be explaining to our ratepayers that, given on a meterage basis, the current is 66% library and 33% community centre rating, the way you actually rate it? Do we need to go to that level of detail, or is it just because it says it's rates? It'll still be on your rates bill, but if you tell people you're actually building a new library and a community centre, it's rated, I'm guessing we're going to rate it proportionally on per square metre or cost per, so eventually it'll be broken into two components, won't it? It won't be all just community centres rates. It'll be, some will be on the library rate and some will be on the community centre reserves rate, won't it?
Yeah. Others may want to comment, but what you're saying is true. But whether or not we would want to go into that level of detail, I would suggest not. But
maybe it's too low level.
Alison may have a comment around that.
I would suggest, and thank you for the question, but we probably wouldn't want to get into that level of detail.
Great, so that concludes 3B. Was there anything further that needed to be answered or shared there? You've heard what we've said. It still sits as a major decision. Cool.
Thank you very much. Okay, the fourth one and our last one in the big decisions at the moment is the Melbourne Recreation and Sports Facility. Like the other ones, what we've worked to do is to get a little bit more clarity around the narrative of what's intended here. I think you'll also see, in addition from the last conversation that we've had, is the comments around the Darfield pool. So saying, no, it's not in this LTP period of time. It is in our infrastructure strategy and currently sitting at year 11. And those are the key changes that we've made to that particular slide or that particular proposed big decision. Sam, I'll hand over.
Bob?
Yeah, still quite upset about this, that we went out to the last LTP with a pool before a recreation centre. And it says in here that a needs assessment has been done. As a council, I might have missed it, but have we seen that? Because it's not what the community are telling me. The community are saying that they would have a full year-round pool against the recreation centre any day, because, as I say, their pool's limited to 4 months a year, so they would rather have a pool, but just leave it at that. But I agree, if this is what's going out, I agree with the three options.
Thanks, Bob. And James, I think you're in the person in the back. You talked to us about this last time, or Tim, around that needs work.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, look, last LTP, there was a commitment to do further needs analysis work in the Melbourne area around the future of sport and recreation facilities, which is the work that was done and completed to inform this big decision number 4. At a briefing late last year, I did inform council and provided a copy of the needs assessment that was done and also was clear in that briefing around the positioning of the current of an indoor pool, and that would be a change from the last LTP to this one. So just sit it in year 11. So yeah, I'm pretty sure you're present in that one, Bob. Okay. Happy to brief you on it outside of this if you'd like, or look at other options.
Any other comments on big decision 4? No, we'll just leave it as it is. Do you want to move into the other matters for community guidance? I guess there's, as we work through these, we've now created a space in the big decisions piece, and if councillors are happy that those big decisions are the only ones that go out to the community, that's fine. But if you note through this that you think actually, although the stuff will still sit kind of as it is, but you'd rather have it lifted into a big decisions piece, which then sits a bit more at the front, it becomes some of the things that we talk about through our media releases more frequently than the other things maybe that sit within the document, then any of that feedback is also welcome today. Deborah, do you have something to say before we jump into the next bits, or are you anticipating?
No, I'm anticipating economic development, which is up on...
Sheffield Pool is the first one. Lydia. So does staff want to talk to any change or anything that's been done between last week and now? We had some good discussion on all of these last week, but if there's room to...
No, what we've done is just try to be a lot more clearer in the narrative with all these options. So apart from that, there's no substantial changes we believe have been made to these slides from what we discussed last week. We just try to make things clearer from the discussions that have been had.
Okay, thank you. Lydia.
I'm not sure if I missed last time, and is it new around we'd like to hear about potential alternative uses for Sheffield Pool site, and that's current pool site we're talking about after demolition. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. I'm mindful, and I'm looking at James, that we don't own all of the site. Yeah. So there might need to be some limitations put around the wording of that. So yeah. It might be usable or publicly available or something.
Yeah, that's right. And I actually just wonder whether it's appropriate having that sentence in there because, with land ownership issues and whatnot.
Well, it might be best if we remove it then, do you think?
I just think you're giving some false pretenses about what could happen on that site. So I would agree with it being removed. And yes, it's nice to actually have that bit in there around other Melbourne facilities in year 11. So I think that helps with it.
Thank you. Anything else on Sheffield Pool? Next up is economic development. Jen, do you want to talk to any changes that were made here?
Very similar to the last slide, we've tried to adjust the narrative to make it a bit more clearer as to what we're looking to achieve through the economic development strategy.
Thank you. Deborah.
I'm just wondering if there's an opportunity within the economic development to look at the possibility of sponsoring or supporting an independent Chamber of Commerce model that's currently Business Canterbury, or we interrelate with Business Canterbury within this particular model. The reason why I'm saying that is that quite often cost-effective changes just mean working alongside our partners, where independently they do have the expertise with regards to Business Canterbury. And it's not mentioned anywhere in this document. It makes the assumption that we're going to spend $8 million and try and do what Business Canterbury actually do. So sorry for turning this on its head, but I think it's important that that we actually clarify those options that are available to us to deliver the strategy, because it mentions about us monitoring a strategy that we put in place. But I think that if you've got the private sector or a localised trust out there who's got the expertise, who can do it better, we be cost effective, we be strategy wise, and we communicate with them.
Thank you, Deborah. what I would say is that the dollar figures that is there is council's contribution through the workshops that we have started. Economic development will come through lots of different parties, whether it's in kind or whether as we explore and move through this, funding may come in from other areas. So what we're actually talking about here is not necessarily council funding the whole lot. This is our contribution towards making an economic strategy, making sure we've got the relevant partners, and it may evolve over time. And we're likely to get in other funding streams as well. But this is about us taking some ownership and leadership to bring this to life. And it does cost to be able to do that, but that is not exclusive to working with partnerships such as the Chambers of Commerce, etc. But and the reason why we're wanting to lead is that if we're reliant on others to take the lead, it may not necessarily be focused specifically on Selwyn. And this is, a strategy that's running in partnership with our investment and divestment strategy, and a whole of approach to make sure that we are fit for purpose for going into the future for our community.
Thank you for that. Shane.
Yeah, look, thank you very much, Sharon. I guess it's an example of maybe some of your first comments around strategy and trust and just council's decision making. This is an example of that. I did listen to the conversations last week around a business case and our return on investment. And I guess what makes me a little bit nervous is whilst it's needed and there's absolute opportunity for investment, economic development and strategic value back to the district, for me to explain that to the constituency, I need a more compelling case, in my opinion, to say that 8.2 or $820,000 a year for the next 10 years will bring in or contributes to a commercial return or potential commercial return. Is there opportunity to perhaps out of not source from general rate, but from commercial dividend to fund a commercial, what potentially would be a commercial commitment or development strategy? Taking on board Deborah's comments around perhaps it's a membership. But if I drove around iZone last week or the week before and just saw the amount of business that's continuing to invest in that particular area over there, and I was just amazed at, for $0, the amount of investment that's coming in organically, and it's incredible, and I'm very thankful for that. But I think it's well overdue, most certainly. Perhaps there'd be a certain level of comfort if it was coming not from general rate, from my, just early conversations, and more from a commercial return.
It may well be as part of the consultation and engagement. What what's indicated in there is that it is budgeted for. It may well be as we get to the end of the consultation that councillors either ask us to reduce the funds that are there, and again, it's rather than adding something in, you have the opportunity to ask us to remove and reduce the cost as part of the final LTP decision making. We always explore opportunities for partnership, but I think in the narrative that we've used, we also need to make sure that we don't lose our competitive advantage. And I think we used some nice language that, yes, some of it has happened organically, but that may not necessarily continue with that little bit of, without that necessary support and strategy. And the workshops that we've held to date, we have had really strong and good buy-in from big business, so there is a need. It may well be that through one of our annual plan processes that we're in a position to come back and say, actually, you know what, we've now got different partnerships and we won't need to continue to fund this at the same level. It's about having the ability to have a starting point.
Megan.
I would like to commend economic development strategy being part of the matters for community guidance, because it's sending a signal to the community that we aren't going to rely on on ad hoc growth, and that we have recognised that we might have lost our historic competitive advantage, and that we're going to do something about it and lead it. And one thing that I've heard over the time that you've came in, Sharon, is you've said that we're going down a pathway of identifying who our real key strategic partners are and how they will actually support and enable all of our strategies. And I would imagine a really good developed economic development strategy would identify which key strategic partners we need to implement it. So endorse the specific comments that we have some partnerships, but also would say that I would expect us to see that as the strategy is developed. So kia ora. Well done.
Thanks, Megan. Phil?
Yeah, I support what's just been said, but just talking about the 8.2 million is a very specific number. Is it part of a bigger budget? And if so, maybe we should need to explain there where the 8.2 million came from. It just seems a bit arbitrary. It's not 9, it's not 10, it's 8.2.
We did actually start off at 11 and called it back, but actually I think we did agree that we would show the phasing of it, and actually very remiss of us, we haven't done that. So in terms of, we will come back with that additional information around phasing.
I guess what I was thinking is that we're obviously we acknowledge that this is our contribution into the plan. We say with this the 8.2 million we're expecting seed money for a much bigger project of around 200 million or whatever it is.
Sorry, yes, the idea is, you know, as we look at our governance, if we have a strategic focus on economic development, that out of the strategic framework, we may bring opportunities to council for consideration for investment or disinvestment or public-private partnership. So the anticipation is that we will get opportunities that will fall out of this. What that looks like and what the dollar figure would be associated with that, we do not yet understand.
So if you like, it's a future contingency plan for things that may come up in the future.
Things that come up in the future would lend itself to conversations back into this council around whether there are investment opportunities of public-private that's not necessarily associated to the economic development. Apologies, I'm maybe not answering you well, or maybe I've misunderstood you, Phil. Sorry.
This is more about identifying the opportunities and partnering to succeed in them, not the funding of what might be a contribution to make that happen.
Yeah, I get that, but as soon as we talk about partnering, we talk about we're going to partner with 8.2 million, and we're trying to attract this from our partners, or this is what, and it's what it says here is that we're trying to create more jobs. Well, we don't create jobs, but the 8.2 money could attract investment of. We hope the 8.2 million will attract 200 million. And that will create the jobs. I guess that would be the question I would be asking if I was going to be submitting on that, saying why is it 8.2 million? It's such a specific number. Yeah.
Thank you.
And I think the commentary changed above, but not in the headlines that were there. So the 8.2, as the next one does, has got it allocated across years of the LTP, and you've included that in the commentary on paragraph 4. But just include that in the headline. That'll be all about how it's displayed to the community. Thank you. Elizabeth.
Yeah, I like that last bit that Phil said, which was if I was submitting on this. And that's how I read these documents. I read them as though I haven't been sitting in council for a year and I'm coming in with fresh eyes. So in terms of this economic development, reading this, I'd be thinking that would be more job fairs, things that we're already doing, showcasing Selwyn tourism and business breakfasts and things like that. I think a lot of the people that would likely come to us and say, well, what's this really about? Probably want a bit more bricks and mortar. They probably feel like they don't want to be using 8.2 million rates funded money going into business breakfasts with free coffees and croissants. Not wanting to say that that's not a good thing, but, you know, we've got people that want to see things being built, really that bricks and mortar kind of thing. Is there anything that can be added in to give an indication of what we have done in the past and what we may consider looking at project-wise in the future, or are we just leaving it open to people's interpretation?
I guess in answer to yours and a little bit in terms of Councillor Dean's question about why 8.2, it's it's not existing projects, it's not existing activities that we're currently doing. It's around some areas where, in terms of the costing, was based on some projects that have been in previous economic development plans that have been undertaken by Benji Patterson. He's invited council to consider a range of different types of projects, all of which we are discussing in focus groups. But in addition, we've got a lot of other businesses at the table who are bringing other projects. We needed to come up with a budget and before we had the strategy, before we had a work program. So we tried to, we budgeted based on some of the key projects and the associated costs, and we wouldn't intend to share the detail of that because we suspect they may change based on what the business sector is telling us and about some of those opportunities for collaboration and partnership. And I guess the only other bit that I would comment on perhaps is that, take your point, Councillor Dean, around we would expect to see other investment around this and other contributions to this. We could potentially make a change with the text that signals that this is our bit, but we would expect other bits in terms of that to be more explicit.
Thank you. Grant.
I wonder whether to give our community a bit of confidence that rather than setting sail for a 10-year voyage, that we include and say at the next LTP this expenditure will be reviewed and it's getting a feedback point so that you can actually, it's sort of a way station where you go, we've had 3 years, this is working good, let's sail on the ship, or let's pull up anchor and have a bit of a pause. So rather than having a 10-year voyage, let's chunk it down. It gives us that wee waypoint where we can, just giving you sort of an example, top of mind to me is, 820,000 expenditure. That's around, we need 20 new commercial buildings in iZone every year of rates to generate that 820,000. So that's the sort of level of investment you're going to require in that sort of context just to get it back to zero. But there'll be obviously wage and job growth associated with that. So I wonder, it may not come to pass, but I wonder whether we shouldn't shorten the voyage and have a check-in point along the way.
I think that's what I was referencing in terms of we can use the annual plan rounds, and it may well be that the governance structure that we wrap around economic development allows and enables feedback into council on a regular basis so that we have key milestones, and we do have some key milestones of what we're looking to change so that at any stage council could have the opportunity to say they're not feeling that the key milestones are being met. And I can't remember what the key milestones are off the top of my head. So we're very keen to make sure that there's good transparency and good governance monitoring. And we're also very clear about holding ourselves to account with some of the key performance indicators that we would have underpinning the economic development strategy.
Thank you. I think
that was a.
I think everything's reviewed at 3 years, isn't it? So we would want to set a direction here and show what it would look like over 10. But like anything that's in this plan, it's all reviewable at the annual plan stage. But at that long-term plan is where we really make these decisions. And so yes, this would be a matter that we would expect community feedback on in 3 years' time. Is that? Yep. Okay. Economic development done. Enhancing customer experience through digital solutions. There are no comments. That will stay as it is.
Actually, sorry, Sam, just on that note, I'd like to welcome Matt, who is our new Chief Digital Officer. It's only his 3rd day in the job. But at this moment in time, I think Tim's just going to cover this off still, or not.
Second, sorry.
Just speak to as you did last time around the digital solutions.
Yeah, well, we'll ask comments. And were there any comments at all? Hi. Sorry.
Yep. No, I just wanted to say it absolutely needs to happen without a doubt. It would be great just to be able to go back to the community and say that this doesn't mean we're going to lose the face of Selwyn being able to be approachable by phone, etc. I don't want it to be that people can't ring and they can't come in and speak to someone and everything has to be go and send an email and do everything online. That's all. I just want to make a comment on that.
No, the objective is to provide a better service for our customers. What that looks like, we don't quite know yet, and that's why we've got this $1.3 million in the budget over the next 10 years is for Matt and his teams to provide a bit of a roadmap in terms of how we can better provide a better experience both for our customers and for our staff to enable them to do the job. So we'll make things easier and better. That's the idea.
Thank you. Shane.
Thank you, Sam. Just before we move on, under matters for community guidance, I guess it's the last long-term plan. One of the things that still sort of irks me is the commitment we made to affinity gymnastics, and then and then the way it was handled after that. I think, and for full transparency, I met with Ryan Jones, the founder of Affinity Gymnastics, last week. My daughter goes to Affinity Gymnastics, and I've been an admirer from far of their community growth over the period of time, and also the awards that they've won. A matter for community guidance should be centred around that particular organisation, given their growth, 400% growth over the period of time since they last presented, and just the future for athletics, Canterbury athletics. Gymnastics being a hub. And maybe it doesn't sit in matters for community guidance, but certainly should be part of the sports strategy moving forward. For Olympic pathways were discussed at the last time, and for sport and alternative sports, judo and that type of thing, we had discussed that. It kind of was left wanting, and I'd like to see some community guidance around that. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Shane. Just to respond to that, I think it would be fair to say that James quite rightly recently identified to me that this was a matter from the last LTP that basically, with all staff changes, had fallen through a gap. James will be bringing a briefing through to councillors in the coming couple of months with actually an outline of a plan or some thoughts, or perhaps even some alternative thoughts. I think it was one of those items that was kind of put in at last moment at the last long-term plan without a full understanding. So James will come and give a briefing to councillors about a potential different way forward with the gymnastics community.
Thank you.
Thanks, Phil. Is yours on enhancing customer experience or a different matter?
It is building on what's just been said and saying that if we're going to start going down to look at that sort of community, we need to be extending to all of the community groups that are in exactly the same position.
So let's come back to the matters that aren't in here yet, and if we could just focus on enhancing customer experience.
We will come back to that.
We'll come back to those things. Yep. Is there anything else, particularly on this slide, that we're looking to change? Nope. Next slide.
That takes us to the next section.
Okay.
Sam, around the...
Is there anything ahead of going through the section that you'd like to say?
Or just if you want to go back to Phil now before we
go into okay. So Shane has raised a matter that's not currently in here, and Phil, you've talked to something. Well, do you want to finish what you were saying?
Yeah, okay. What I was saying is that it is absolutely, there are many parts of our community that aren't being representative in our long-term planning. In fact, sometimes they don't even effectively fit in our short-term planning, and there are lots of things that this council has promised that have fallen away by the way. So we all know the groups that have been promised things that haven't happened. That is certainly one of them. And the gentleman, Ryan's been playing full court press because I got communicated with as well. But there are other teams, and the performing arts, I'm going to say it is one of the biggest communities we have in Selwyn that has no representation whatsoever. So if we're going to start to go down the path of gymnastics and judo and alternative things, we also need to look at the biggest community, which is we're not looking at, as the performing arts.
I take your point, Councillor Dean. I'm sorry if it wasn't made clear, but in the previous LTP, there was actually a decision by council that we need to revisit in just in the interest of good form. That
perhaps in this LTP, we should be talking about performing arts.
Perhaps.
We'll come back to those matters if they aren't in here. If Deborah, is this the same thing? So we need to let's hear from councillors if there's other things that aren't in here, because this is the last chance we've got to think about this stuff. I don't think we came today thinking that we were going to bring new things to the table to add to the rates that currently sit at 16%. I would have expected that people would have raised that before today to add things in. So the individual items that have been mentioned will be picked up by Sharon, and then if we can think about how we relay information back to the people external to our organisation who have been involved in some of that discussion, but also highlight for councillors what the next steps may or may not look like for each of those matters.
Yeah, thank you. And also in terms of, that's part of the submission process for the LTP for community groups that want to come forward. Where we've got to get better is in terms of not having sort of significant commitments made at the last moment without ensuring as part of the LTP discussions or submissions that we do a proper workup and bring it maybe back to an annual plan. So that's perhaps the structure that we haven't had, so that rather perhaps than introducing something new around the performing arts, I'll use that as an example, is that if a submission comes through from the performing arts community and councillors give those considerations and they give direction to me as CEO for me to work with my team to work something up, then we will bring that back within a structure that ensures it is brought up and comes back as either part of a paper to future councils. There are a couple of areas of mopping up from the last long-term plan that we need to look at, and the gymnastics is one. And I suspect that there may be a few items around the performing arts, and we will sort through that and keep councillors informed.
Thank you. Deborah.
We're on page 27, keeping our community informed.
We will move to that unless there's some other things that people wanted to raise now, and we think about how we tackle them either in this LTP or other routes. So have you got something on that, Deborah, or if you're going to wait until we get to the keeping community informed?
Okay, I will have something to say on that, because it's important that we understand that people come along with the wish list. It's got to go into the LTP process. We just can't. In the past, what we've done is we've tended to say, oh, that's a good project. Oh, that will get me some kudos or whatever. Just take a pet project. Oh, so it goes into the LTP process. And then it's further on down the track that you realise, oh, haven't budgeted for DCs, haven't collected this is the impact on rates, this is the blowout. You know, there's no business case even being presented for it. So I quite like the fact that if something does come up and we think it's a good project, that we do actually have a policy or a strategy around what Sharon's just said, that we don't just put it in for the sake of putting it in. We actually consider it over a timeline and give it serious consideration and say yes or no, whether it's in or out after a business case. Because this is what's got us in trouble with so many projects on our books and not being able to deliver. So that's my comment on that.
Thanks, Deborah.
The only thing I was going to add was that the very next slide, there is the investment divestment strategy in there, and that's the sort of thing that I would think would be appropriate in there, is if there are various needs, if there's worth putting a business case in there, then yeah, that's I you know, on reflection, the Affinity Gymnastics thing, you know, they are a great group, but at the same time, our understanding was insufficient, and the communication back to them was poor, very poor, to them and to the community. That doesn't mean there aren't hundreds of groups potentially who would like a piece of the pie that is paid for by all residents. That doesn't mean they all get one either. And if something like the investment divestment strategy can help provide a bit more of a framework around that, then I'm all for it. Thanks.
Thanks. And Sharon, I'll just get you to comment at the end of this, because a couple of ideas have been raised about how this will be handled. So around what Deborah sharing, the not rushing in piece. and dealing with the things through annual plans and our ability to come back to these conversations year on year.
The structure I was talking to.
That's right. Grant?
I guess I'm a bit concerned about the integrity of our organisation when we have a proposal in our last LTP and it's not consciously decided to drop it out. That, it hasn't come to the council and said, well, that project that was in the last LTP that we agreed on is now 86th, or it's going to James and we're going to come back with a workup and there's no budget associated with it. It reflects on us quite badly as an organisation around our integrity that we do that. And I guess I'd like a better process where that we do have some conscious decision making around these things. So it does come to the LTP process and say, actually, that CapEx project's no longer going to continue because X, Y, Z, and it's communicated like that. But just to say, well, it's a bit of a mop up. We've got some things we didn't go so well, and we'll come back in a few months' time. Well, it's pretty difficult for James to come back after the LTP and say, after consideration, I think this might be a good option, but the cost associated with that is Y, and we've got no budget associated with it.
Thank you, Grant. I probably didn't word this particularly well. In terms of we were coming forward with a bit of a mea culpa, it is unlikely to say that we would be coming saying this is a good idea and we want some funding. The part of the briefing is coming forward and saying, actually, this has been identified, that it actually wasn't picked up and progressed. James has done a lot of work to have a look that says, actually, this probably doesn't need an investment and there are other options available, and actually playing those other options back to councillors that may not necessarily require investment. Which kind of leads into what Sam has asked me about the process going forward, and what I've alluded to is in terms of when we come to timing of submissions. And again, it's councillors being in that strategic mindset, and our investment and disinvestment strategy is probably going to come to fruition around the same time as our LTP submissions and hearings. So, there may be a bit of mismatch in timing, but it is kind of what Deborah said. It's not let's just grab everything, it's let's apply a bit of strategic thinking and give me direction as CEO for the things that you think are of strategic importance that we can look up, we can do some work on, and then we can bring back to the next annual plan round with the appropriate funds, workup, etc., rather than perhaps ad hoc. So we're trying to move away from the knee-jerk reaction ad hoc approach to actually a framework and guidance, and then our community knows what to expect. And if we get that language right or correct at the time of the submissions and the hearings, so that they understand, yes, councillors have asked CEO to work on this, we will do that and we will engage with. And the next time that will be looked at or formally decided on would be in an annual plan round.
And so on that, we need to think about our own accountability to that decision-making process, because at the final day of deliberations, there'll be quite a different tone of discussion around each of these projects, and everyone feeling like they've just heard the most important thing that needs to be added into the LTP next year, and that urgency kind of becomes the front and centre thing, rather than actually thinking, it's a 10-year plan, this could happen in year 7, how do we better consider where this might need to be, because we've got different people in our ears, we've just heard from hundreds of our community on this stuff. So if we can, it's good to have this discussion today, but I think we're going to have to reflect on that ourselves as we move through this process over the coming months. Megan.
Well, actually, you've given me the assurance that I needed, because my anxiety levels were rising, going, it sounds like a lolly scramble, rather than a really clear, strategic, well thought out way of delivering to our community. So I don't need to comment, because you gave me the assurance that it's not going to be that, and that it will tie in with our other strategies along with community, the way we do community funding. So thanks.
Thanks, Megan. Elizabeth.
I'm not familiar with a current divestment strategy and how it's been done in the past and how it's going forward. So tying into what you were just saying, it's quite general what you said. So I'm just trying to get a little bit more specific. Are we looking at, over the next wee while, creating a proper divestment strategy for council, or are we looking at opening up the conversation with the community of what they feel the divestment strategy could be per hall, per space, etc.?
Thank you. Perhaps we had a workshop before Christmas where we introduced with PwC the concept of an investment strategy. So there's been a very low-key sort of, not strategy, some thoughts within council. What we're not asking necessarily the community for input into the investment strategy. We're keeping our community informed by saying we are exploring an investment strategy and what that would look like, and how we can develop an investment or disinvestment strategy for the council to make good strategic decisions going into the future about investments, return on investments, or exiting from particular areas because of costs, etc., associated. So we have engaged PwC, and there will be some workshops coming forward in the next few months, and Councillor Grant and Shane will be the governance partners that will walk alongside Tim and Alison with regards to where we end up with investment. But it is a good thing and it is a positive move.
Thank you. That brings us on to, Deborah, I know you put your light on, but is it back to where we...
Page 27.
Yes, good. Okay. So it now brings us back, and divestment investment is one of the matters. If we just run through the slides that are here, I don't know if you want to present anything, Jen, that will inform any discussion for us, but otherwise we'll just work through Rolleston Access, Lincoln Town Centre, and so on as you put them up for us.
Sure, Sam. I think with these matters for keeping the community informed, we've taken on board some of the feedback that council gave us last week. With those, what we've done mainly is try to strengthen the narrative to make sure that they're a lot clearer in terms of the information that we're providing the community. So we have a number of them, and we've put them over a couple of pages. So we've been talking about Rolleston Access, and we've added some new, not new information, we've updated the narrative on that to try and make that a little bit more clearer. Also around the upgrades for the Lincoln Town Centre, strengthened partnership with Mana Whenua, and compulsory organic. So the ones on that page are the ones where we had some questions, and we've tried to update the narrative to make sure that's a lot clearer. Pardon?
Just add, thanks, Jenny. There'll be opportunities for further information to be provided via the various committee meetings as well, just to bring some councillors up to speed in terms of some of these projects have predated their arrival at council, so we'll take some opportunity to provide more information during those sessions between now and the beginning of the consultation process as well. Okay. Sorry.
Thank you. Just popping down to the next slide, and I can go back if there are any questions that you want to go through a little bit later. We talked about the community infrastructure development contribution, so we talked about that in December and January. We haven't updated that. That has stayed the same. A little bit more, some of the HQ improvements, a little bit more information on that investment divestment strategy, our position on nitrates, the public transport services, and walking improvements. So we've I think it's more the investment strategy that we updated the narrative more on that point. But otherwise, these are the points that we've raised in sort of December and January, consistent with those conversations. There's nothing new. Apart from the chlorination, which we agreed on earlier, that we'll take that to a community awareness piece, and you've seen that.
Thank you.
So I sort of mumbled through that a wee bit, but I hope that gives an overview.
Right. Deborah.
Thank you. Lincoln Town Centre upgrade. We have a failing road that is being patched and patched and patched. So I'm looking at the now estimated $46 million. That's more than double of our what we assessed 3 years ago. When we first put this project out, we were looking at $15 million in 2016. So the issue here is that it doesn't say, it says which will start by creating. There's no timeline here. The timeline keeps getting pushed out and pushed out. This is what happens when you push timelines out. We also have another issue. Part of this will be funded by, dare I say, NZTA, And consequently, we actually have other commitments, probably with regards to Wakakakahi, with regards to the new government strategy, which is going to impact. We've only budgeted, I think, for all of our roading, and I may stand corrected because I don't have it in front of me in this document, 89 million for roading. Was that the total that was put forward for roading? So if we've got major roading issues that we have to fund, let's get real. You know, the $46 million is not going to cut it with regards to the delivery of this project. What I would like to suggest is a meaningful timeline, what can be funded, what can actually be started, and a whole picture plan for it, not just sitting in there, $46 million, I will do it sometime. You've got to have some sort of start of where we're going to plan for A, then B, then C, then D, and then budget for it. Because we're collecting DCs for it. The reality is 46 million, 3 years' time, we might be looking at 80 million. You know, I mean, so this is where I'm coming from with regards to the fact we're keeping our community informed, but we're not giving them any commitment that we can afford to do the project. We're going to start the project, how we're going to implement the project, what timeline, what budget, and this is what we need, a strategy of how we're going to start delivering some of these big projects, and
Cool.
we don't have it.
Yeah, thank you, Deborah, for that. So, I mean, design has started this year, so there's some work underway for that. We have a phased project. There's 4 phases to this work. And we have got some slides we'll present at the Infrastructure Committee on the 21st of February, providing more detail. So this work has been phased out, capital work starting next financial year. Some of it ties in with growth and certain plan changes which will require that work to be facilitated. So there is a bit of movement there, but the work has been phased out over that 10 years, and we can go into more detail on that.
Can we tell that story in the narrative instead of what we've got here? Because what you've just explained to me is a lot clearer than what we've got on the progression of the upgrade for our community.
Cool, thank you. Well, I'll take that as a compliment. And yes, we can add some more narrative to that. Yep.
Thanks, Brian. Elizabeth.
I'll let Lydia go first because she might ask the same thing.
Lydia.
Yeah, I'm surprised. I mean, like, I'm guessing that we're going to see more detail at a later date around some cost breakdowns of what these projects actually include. And, well, I'm hoping that's what we'll see. And I just wondered around the walking and cycling improvements with the Alpine to Sea Trail. We had included like the $27 million budget in that originally. Is that going to be included in more of the detail breakdown, or I just wonder why putting it there with no pricing on it, and some of the other stuff has dollar figures around it. So, you know, like HQ Improvements has dollar figures, Lincoln Town Centre has dollar figures, and then we have this here with no figures around it. Pardon?
Yeah, I'm just seeking some advice. And thank you for tuning up now.
Andrew might be able to add some light to the matter.
It was in previous ones we had.
Yeah, so there's, for the Alps to Sea cycleway, there's basically $22 million sitting in there as a placeholder, 12 million to get us from Arthur's Pass to Springfield, and another 10 million to get us from there to our existing networks at West Melton or whatever. So those are placeholder budgets. We are advancing the feasibility studies at the moment, as you know, which will shed more light on this, and it also will provide advice to council on potentially how this could be funded And it may not be that council decides that it funds all of it. It could be decided that it may be better to be funded via a trust through certain sections. So we're yet to come back to council on that, but essentially those budgets are placeholders to at least get something into the LTP so that we can bring this forward as you see fit.
Okay, thank you.
Elizabeth. Was that the question you were going to ask?
No, it wasn't. It wasn't. She's totally different road. So just, I totally missed what Murray's reply was to Deborah, unfortunately, which may have partially answered my question. So it's got the word progressive up there. Were we on the wrong slide, I think? Lincoln Town Centre. So it says the progressive upgrade. Now, the problem with the word progressive is it has two different meanings. And so if you're coming in and reading that, you might not understand. To me, I'm hoping that means a staged approach. Is it a staged approach that you're considering with this option? Just wondering if we could change the word progressive and maybe put staged.
We're happy to move with staged. Yep.
Yeah, that's cool. So the other thing is for Andrew. We talked about this last week about the compulsory organics. There's going to be a lot of discussion around that $190 a year for green bin from a whole lot of people who are not actually going to use it at all. I think it would just be really nice if there was some way that we could, prior to the LTP, engage with the community and see if there's some option to come up with another solution. And I know that this is a legislated thing, but there's always ways to tackle that. It will be good for the community to see that we are attempting as a council to take that further, that conversation.
Yeah, hi, thanks for your comments, Elizabeth. It's fairly prescriptive in the Gazette notice that it has to be a curbside service. I think, if I'm recalling correctly, what you had previously mentioned to me at one point was maybe sort of community hubs, I think, for composting, that would not be compliant with the legislation, so would run foul of the law. But I get where you're coming from, and certainly have concerns around making sure that we communicate this change in a way that people can understand. It's not sort of necessarily something we would have driven maybe directly ourselves. So we just want to make it really clear in our communication and engagement with the community.
Thank you. Grant.
Just for clarity for the community, I mean, just keeping our community informed appears like you don't need to actually say yes or no on this. This is just stuff we're doing. And I guess there's probably, I'm almost inclined to say we should be requiring community guidance on it, because the feedback I'm getting, and it may be different from the rest of the councillors, is that there's a substantial portion of the community is looking for anyhow possible ways of reducing the rate increases, and they'll be looking right to this document to try and find, where do I find a place that I can submit to make cuts? And so they would read this page and go, well, there's no point submitting on that because the council's just going to do that. They're just telling me they're going to do that. And so much as it pains me to say, when you've got 46 million for 1.6 kilometres of road, a lot of our community is going to go, if I had 46 million in my pocket, would I spend it on that? And maybe not, but there's some things that must be done, and some things that are nice to do, which may come under consideration. So I think that's one of the two questions. One I want to ask to Andrew was, you piqued my interest when you said you'd put placeholder budgets in for the Alps to Ocean Cycleway. Does placeholder budgets affect the rating outcome for this LTP? So when you're putting placeholder budgets in for an amount of $12 million, wouldn't that be a big decision? 22 million? How can that sit in the back of a document and go, well, actually, there's $22 million we haven't told you about, but it ain't a big decision. So those kind of decisions are pretty massive, aren't they, to the rating impact? Yeah. So that's one question. So.
if I can just jump in and respond to that question, Grant. So basically, in the LTP, we've divided up the Alps to Sea cycleway project into 2 stages. As I said before, Arthur's Pass to Springfield, then Springfield to the rest of our network. Stage 1 is new funding. That's sort of the $12 million figure that's in there at the moment. And stage 2 is the 10 million, which actually encompasses all the separate walking cycling projects that we had in our LTP previously that connected between Springfield right down to Kirwee. So for all intents and purposes, only 12 million is new funding that's being asked through the LTP as a placeholder at the moment, if that helps with understanding the relativity between that aspect.
Yeah, I hear you, and I understand the explanation. Are there likely to be any other placeholder budgets of such magnitude that we're not aware of?
From a transportation perspective, no. It was really important, as discussed with Mayor Sam when we first sort of thought about bringing this project into the draft LTP, that we not just have it as a line item with a 0 against it, that it actually did have some cost associated with it that we needed to try and dial into this 10-year period, as opposed to, for instance, thinking outside the 10-year period.
So the Mayor might have Shane Jones taking him along the route.
That was my question.
And sorry, I just want to add in the similar approach, because the wording in there is around feasibility study. So again, in terms of the lifespan of the plan, but also the annual plan, it's about as the feasibility study and the business case comes forward, there's always the opportunity at any point for that to stop.
But what I was hearing was that we will be rating for it in 2024, because it's in the ratings projections.
New project.
So I'm not convinced it's not a bigger decision somewhere that should be there. But anyway, I'll leave that open to the wider group.
And that goes into, that is capital driven. So in terms of how it impacts onto the rates, maybe Alison, you would like to explain that, please?
It would be, Grant, it would be a loan funded project. So it would be the debt servicing component that would flow through to the rates.
Yeah. And
Grant, why don't you finish your questions and we can come back and then have a look at these items.
Last question, I suppose, is on the same theme really, is that this document doesn't really give our ratepayers, or even the governors for that matter, the ability to look at real level of service cuts, potential level of service cuts to attain rating impact, which might align with the governance view or the community view. So I see in a comparable district, you've got Christchurch City with councillors putting amendments to the LTP forward. I don't regard it as my job to go around scurrying through the accounts looking as to where the potential savings are. I think it's the CEOs and staff's jobs to do that. But I would like to see some optionality in this document saying, as a community, are you prepared to see this not delivered and this is the result? Because I think that's what our community is asking me.
Thank you, Grant. And in terms of when we get to the financial section, Alison will speak to some of the optionality and the things that we have considered. And in terms of what has been put forward has been through a process of, we started at 23%, we've pulled it back down to 16. So in terms of, we've had some rigour around not going out with a rates increase. You will see in the infrastructure governance committee, because again, there is still opportunities to reduce and make decisions to reduce. There will be that presentation that gives that greater detail and an outline, which will then enable governors to make some decisions to say, well, we actually want to reduce the cost related to those items. But certainly what we have put in there to date is really about those key essentials and enabling growth, just as we talked about at the last the workshop.
And are we happy with that, I guess, is the question, isn't it? Is that putting in a document that we feel comfortable with, but shouldn't we have an element or two we're uncomfortable with for our community to see?
Thanks, Grant, for that challenge on it. Shane.
Thank you, Sam. Yeah, some really good points here, Grant. Thank you very much for bringing those up. And perhaps the walking, cycling improvements potentially might fit into an investment. Yeah, I heard that figure too. And if we're just talking about figures, we were talking about figures back in the big decisions part of it, and making discussions and arguments around figures. And 22 is a large figure that I think should be in the decision-making processes for sure. My question's around the types of cycling surfaces. And in previous, Andrew, we'd spoken about, maybe 4 years ago, 3 years ago now, spoken about Southbridge to Leaston and the community desire there to just have a metal track that has seen perhaps Horata out that way, and then other areas around the Otago and around the area there, metal tracks, which obviously still require maintenance. But the Alpine to Sea, is that, what type of surface would that be? And secondly, the HQ improvements, and I did listen to the discussion last week because I was absent. Is that new budget? Sorry, or is this keeping our community informed as if that's what's going to happen? Is this asking for 3.75, or is that what's already budgeted for the completion of that project?
The numbers that are on these slides are all factored into the financials.
So that's
So in previous long-term plans, there was mention of the HQ and a funding, and there is the need to continue because we have had growth. And Grant asked the question last week about, did it have to be Rolleston HQ or were there other alternatives? The funding could be used for other alternatives. Actually led us to have a good conversation with Grant about some other options that we hadn't been aware of at the time. Regardless, we've outgrown the current facility.
Understand. The improvement to the council chambers, which I think is definitely, does that include the digital, or is that infrastructure? Is it?
No, the digital will be a separate conversation wrapped up into the 1.3. The improvement to council chambers is from many different aspects, from a cultural, from a youth, and being more welcoming.
Understand. Thank you. Just the question around surface, Andrew. Thank you.
Yeah, that's fine. So the history on that is that we discussed this at some length with the council, probably going back 10 years or more now, when the whole issue about affordability of these cycleways was being discussed. And so basically where we landed was that where a cycleway was connecting between townships and had a function that was beyond just recreational, i.e. an alternative mode, can be used by cyclists, pedestrians, people on mobility scooters, whatever it may be, that surface be sealed. But the compromise was, instead of having a 2.5 metre wide or 3 metre wide pathway, we would actually pull that down to 1.5 metres and achieve the savings there. From a life cycle analysis, it's actually cheaper to have it sealed on those sort of more high use sections operating on that basis. And the recreational sections that people might ride on a mountain bike or something like that would be unsealed. For instance, for Alps to Sea, we talked about that at our meeting with the consultants last week. And so again, the Alps to Springfield would be unsealed, whereas the section connecting between Springfield and the rest of our sealed network between our townships would be sealed. So that's the general approach.
So my question then, if this is a fairly new project, is where does this potentially, and I don't know where Springfield to QE sat in the strategy, and we discussed the strategy before, does that potentially usurp the Leaston to Southbridge?
Oh, okay. So the likes of Leaston to Southbridge falls into that same category as creating a commuter active mode link between townships, a bit like we did for Leaston and Doyleston. So yes, it would fall into being sealed. Because it was, again, on the basis that it would operate, it has the least whole of life costs if it is sealed compared to being unsealed.
Thank you.
Thanks. We might take a break. We're going for a couple of hours and there's still a bit more to discuss. So there's yeah, there's the financials we want to get through as well. So let's take 15 minutes and come back at 3:30. Thanks.
Shall we just leave it on? Okay, Sophie the me. It's me and Sophie.
we had an order of speakers before it went off, and I didn't take note of who they were, other than to know Sophie was up the top of the list somewhere. So Sophie, will go to you, and anyone else that wants to push their microphone on now for further comments, please do. Sophie.
Yeah, Brett was good to help me try and condense my thoughts. But I guess what I'm taking out of the various bouncing around these different topics is that even though all of these have been discussed at briefings and workshops and meetings over the last 1 to 3 years, if not longer, there are definitely bits that we've forgotten. And I guess there's questions that if we're asking them, then our community will definitely ask why. And I think I said it last time, and I'm sorry to repeat myself, but a bit of why for these projects might be helpful. For instance, like if you're looking at cutting out something like, say, the walking and cycling one, that is a long-standing project. The feasibility study is being funded from better off funding from the government rather than by rates. The intention may not end up being that we put it through, as in actually build it. It may be community groups that do it, but it will never happen unless the feasibility studies are done in the first place. But the aim of it is economic development and tourism. So it's like, it looks like an easy thing to go, nah, you can cut that. But actually you kind of almost need just that wee bit of extra context for this is why we did it agreed to do it in the first place. Same with public transport improvements. Okay, it costs money to improve X, Y, Z or build a park and ride. But if we have more of that, then as in PT improves, more people can get away from having to use a car, and the costs, the immense costs that actually come from every household car, especially around here where we have way too many cars in proportion to the rest of the country. And then you will save money. It's all of it is kind of, a lot of it is paying it forward type stuff, except that we're still 10 years back from when the first idea was first plugged. So I guess I'm asking for a bit of why, again, some context of what these projects will mean for our people, and what benefits they're for, rather than somebody just going, it's all vanity projects and useless. Same goes for level of service. I mean, you get people asking for lower rates, but then complain when that impacts the surface quality of the roads or the amount of mowing that happens around the area. That is where, you know, that's funded by rates. You can't have it all, unfortunately. Yeah, that's me. Thank you.
Does any of the team want to reflect on how that can be brought in, or how we do that?
Yeah, look, thank you. It's almost doing a little bit of what we did last week, is fleshing this area out more. And we acknowledge that we probably didn't get to discuss this area as much last week. So we will look at how we can incorporate some more narrative that makes sure that we tell the story, and have that narrative available when it comes through for the draft LTP, when it comes through for endorsement in March. So we'll give ourselves the space and time to be a bit more comprehensive in the narrative.
Megan.
Kia ora. So my understanding of the process that's been outlined is that what we were looking at for the last few months has been the really big strategic decisions that need to be made. And the things that fell into the categories of big decision, community guidance, and for community information were big decisions were the new things, and community guidance were things that we actually needed to do a check-in. My assumption for community informed, and this could be based on, I think I still get away for a little bit more time of saying new to doing things, but I know that time's coming to an end really quickly, really soon. But my assumption of what has fallen into keeping the community informed is that it's either we have no choice because it's actually regulatory and we must do it, or we've previously engaged with our community through the long-term plan process, or we've had various decisions and papers that have come to the council and we've fleshed it out already. And so I want to say, based on that assumption, then I'm really comfortable with keeping these decisions in the keeping our community informed category, because one part of my community that I come from is that you must respect the decisions of the people that have been in leadership before you, and it can't be assumed. And that we have 29,000 members, they come and go, and if we've heard from a whānau 3 years ago, then we can't assume that their voice doesn't count 3 years later because they don't turn up. And so I wanted just to say on that basis, I'm really comfortable with these decisions remaining in this category, and that you'll to the detailed items down the track in that wānanga.
Thanks, Megan. Bob, your light's on. Are you wanting, it's not on my thing, but just your microphone. You're okay? Okay. Does anyone else have any comments on the keeping the community informed things that are here? The matter then that we did discuss it.
I'm going to pick up Grant's question. We've taken chlorine out and we've put it at the back. While we've got the cycleway, and I appreciate this, while we've got the cycleway project in there, right, we've got to find a new funding race stream. We don't know, but just supposing, like our other projects, we can find money, we've put a value, a dollar value in there. Because if we don't calculate that dollar value, that's going to impact on our rates at the end of the day. That probably hasn't been calculated in any of the general rate impacts. And that's a little bit of a concern to me.
Sure.
I was going to ask Alison just to speak to that, please.
So we can, Deborah, I think as I said to Grant earlier, we can add the amounts in here, but these projects will be loan funded. So the impact on the rate itself is somewhat marginal. So I understand where you're coming from. We can put the percentages in there, but we're not talking huge percentage changes in a person's rates bill.
Can you explain that a little more so that we can just unpack the difference in between things that are operational and those that are capital in nature, and what difference, 1 million, 10 million, 50 million might do in that space?
So roughly just now we're sitting at a debt level of about 125 million. So if we assume that to be 6%, 6% roughly will work out between say 0.8 and 1% on a person's rate. As that debt grows, obviously that percentage number in terms of how it equates to dollars will get bigger. So yes, if our debt was to grow huge, then that percentage would impact. But as it stands just now, we're sort of looking at a 1%. That's from a capital standpoint. From an OPEX, the OPEX cost, if we look at, say, FTE as an example, that full cost flows directly into a general rates calculation.
I guess in summary, and you're going to cover this off a little bit more when you hit the financials, in terms of CapEx and the CapEx program, with it being debt funded, the actual direct impact onto rates and cost to our ratepayer is not as significant. And in terms of if councillors are, wanting to seek a significant reduction, that has to come direct from OPEX costs and not necessarily from CapEx. Yes, there is a percentage of operational costs associated with CapEx, but even then that is still not significant. And so it's really not necessarily the CapEx program that is the significant driver of the rates increases. And if you go back to one of our original workshops where we talked about what was the drivers behind rates increases, you can see that it was all related to operational type cost increases, such as materials, such as goods, such as salaries, such as all of those aspects. So in terms of when you're thinking and doing your strategic thinking about the way forward, the capital program is not necessarily the place to gain savings because it can be marginal.
Thanks, Sharon. Is there anything else on these matters? Because if we can now move into the financials, and you can present through where they currently sit, and then we can wrap up any further discussion on items that are big decisions, which is what we talked about beforehand. Are there some things that sit within here? And I mean, even the Lincoln Town Centre piece is what the main road in our second largest town, a massive amount of work that's going to be both visual and change the functionality of that main street. We're not asking do it or not do it, but actually by lifting its profile to being the big, well, we are asking do it or don't do it, but at the front end of our consultation actually says, here's a major piece of work that's going to transform our second largest town. Put it in front of people rather than having it somewhere else. Or are there some other things in here that you want to have as a big decision, or are you comfortable with the three that we've got after taking out chlorine? But we'll come back to that, so this just gives us a chance to now listen to the financials. Alison.
Sam, an observation is, and it's, Deborah's made it as well, is that the financial costs of CapEx carry forwards is killing us. The LTC is a classic. If it was 21 million last LTP, now it's 46. So our ratepayers are up for another 22 million for the same delivery of, so that's just going on the mortgage. So the non-delivery of CapEx projects is bloody costs us, isn't it?
And that was, I think we had that discussion at the last workshop about recognising. Murray presented I think in fact the graph is still in here with regards to some of the challenges that might have come through the restructure and the COVID. That's not excuses. Even prior to that, our CapEx delivery wasn't the best. Our commitment through this CapEx programme is trying to smooth out the carry forwards and actually committing to ramping up and being able to deliver. And that's one of the challenges our new Executive Director for Infrastructure will have, and appropriately monitoring, is that we have the ability to ramp up and deliver, because our CapEx programme continues to grow and actually we have to get better at delivering it, and that includes our partnerships with our contractors.
The challenge is, Sharon, that some of those CapEx projects might not be either fit for purpose now because of the elapsed time, or they may no longer be actually required to be done. So a CapEx review of the whole work program might be worthwhile.
Yep, and that's one of the areas that Tim will be focusing on, because we've discovered a CapEx list with a number of CapEx projects on it that it needs a thorough review, and that's probably part of the infrastructure committee meeting at some stages too. This is where we're sitting, and get some guidance.
There's only one caveat to that discussion: as long as they're not in Springswood.
Can't guarantee that, Grant.
Alison.
Thanks, Sam. We're going to start this off just talking through the key changes we've made since we talked to this last week. We've also added one slide in which talks to our people budgets, and Lisa is going to talk to that.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I presented to you in December a couple of slides, so this content should be familiar to you. The key piece here is that leaders were asked to request the FTE that they thought they needed to fulfil the requirements of the long-term plan. The sum total of those requests came in at 44.14 FTE. That was not acceptable to ELT, and Sharon then led ELT through a rigorous process of evaluating whether those roles would be required, essential, and deliver real value to ratepayers. The criteria were around whether the roles would help us to fulfil our legislative requirements, meet level of service and or mitigate reputational risk, and respond to the growth demands of our district. The end recommendation, as you're aware, is that we're putting up 22.65 FTE at a total cost of 1.658 million. 9.5 of those roles are largely self-funded. So part of the rigour with assessing those roles was to see whether we had any alternate sources of funding for them. We've also compared ourselves. Now, noting this comparator is based largely on open source data with other councils to see how do we compare in terms of residents and the number of staff that we have to fulfil the needs of the district. And even after the injection of the 22 additional roles, we compare well with other councils. So we're not asking for anything that's in excess of what other districts are doing.
Thanks for that. Budget paper, is there, people budgets paper, is there another, you're going to continue through the rest of the financials and then we'll come back to, to them? Cool. Thanks, Lisa.
Do you need me on?
So just going back to the key changes that we made that Craig can walk through in a little bit more detail. I think one of the things that's worth just talking to the room about is we have done some modelling outside of this just to see what the impact on rates would be if we were to take out some capital projects. So we looked at a random sample which roughly equated to about 50 million over a 3-year period. And going back to sort of the conversations we've had earlier, the impact on rates was marginal to the extent it was only about 0.5%. So that 0.5% would roll over the years. Obviously, that would then reduce our need to potentially borrow for those projects. We accept that there's probably, say, a 2-3% linkage to operational costs in those capital projects. But I think, as Sharon alluded to earlier, if we did want to reduce these numbers, capital projects, accepting we have got some delays there, is not necessarily the answer to reducing these numbers. So I just wanted to just cover that we have been looking at these numbers to see what levers could we pull to look at, is it 16, is it 12 or whatever. So we have done some work on that space.
And it may just be worthwhile reiterating that part of bringing down to the 16% is that we also took a percentage out of the budget. And I can't remember what the percentage was, Alison.
I think we ended up with 14.9. Yep. So we'll go through the key changes, Craig, if you're happy to just talk to that now.
So from the last workshop last time we went through the rating examples here, just suggested that we change the first rating example there to the average rateable property value. So we've changed that from, it was like 790,000 to an $825,000 property. So that's just demonstrating what the average house price in the district would pay and the average rate bill and the increase there. So that's coming in about 14.7% for the first year of the LTP for a property with sewerage and 15.7% with a property without sewerage. So that's pretty much the only change in that particular slide.
Yeah, we'll move to targeted rates next.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. So last time, the slide that we had in here for the target rates showed the dollar movement per rate, which is a little bit confusing. So what we've done is just updated that slide pack to show the actual dollar rate per year and the movement. So that's the only thing we've really changed on that slide, other than just sort of refining some of the rating calculations.
So just to understand the slide now and the key change, last time you had to add those numbers together to get to what the increase was year on year, whereas now that's the explicit number of the total rate, including the increase for each year.
Yes, correct.
You finish through the financial stuff and then we'll come back to questions.
Those were the key changes that we've made since the last time. So I think we'll just open up any questions.
Great, thank you. Elizabeth.
I was just wondering what availability rate was. So it's under.
So that's in turn, that's all linked to the water supply rate. So the availability rate is if the service is provided at the gate, but there's no connection. At current time, there's no house on the site. So a property like that would pay the availability rate, but wouldn't pay a metered supply because they're not drawing down any water, I guess.
Thank you. Just looking at page, oh, it's not come up. Look, the financial for the targeted rates. We've concentrated on the general rate movement, and then we come down to the targeted rate movement. And just doing some rough calculations, trying to add up what's here and what just the average household would end up paying. The increases on the general rate component is quite substantial. You know, I mean, some of these figures, as you know, incrementally, I'll just choose one and it'll be a community centre rate. You know, 201, 231, 266, 298, and then we go to the 300s, 344. It's not coming down. Swimming pool rate, recreation reserve, up to 500, 600, 700. But just concentrating roughly, if you look at the increases over 3 years, I calculated just on the basic ones, currently paying 1,300, that would actually increase to 1,600. So that's basically 300 per year, and that was just choosing the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 top ones, just as a rough calculation. There'll be others who are paying more than that because they're on water supplies, others aren't on water supplies, so I tried to choose ones that weren't on water supplies. And I'm just wondering, this is going out, you know, sure, we've got, every time we build a new building, we've got operational costs. I'm just wondering, every time we build a new swimming pool, we've got operation costs, we've got compliance costs, and all of those sorts of costs are actually built into these increases. I'm just starting to wonder what's the straw that breaks the camel's back for some in our community with regards to the ability to pay rates. We talk about Christchurch City, you know, nothing unusual about paying $5,000, $6,000. We always prided ourselves on the fact that we were a cheaper option and we attracted a lot of ratepayers because we were the cheaper option. And I'm just sort of looking at some of these figures now, and we're going to be compatible, if not maybe even higher. And it comes back down to that affordability for our ratepayers when you start adding all the financial costs up incrementally.
I was just going to add into that, Deborah, there's a component about, there's also a challenge, isn't there, about kicking the can down the road. And I think in our earlier workshop, we touched on having, you know, a desire to have lower rates. And actually some of that has led us to this point too. And yes, acknowledging our community is expanding and understanding what the additional rates revenue is generated from our expanding community. So there's multiple things at play here, but the challenge is that in terms of we've got our community who want to be able to come and live, work and play here. We've heard that from the pre-community engagement. We're hearing that from different sources. And the reality is to come live, work and play, there is a cost associated with that. And the balance is if you kick the can down the road and don't look at strategic, long-term, intergenerational, it's going to come back and bite you on year 1, 2 or 3. And it's about, you know, part of the challenge for councillors, and I absolutely get it, is having those courageous thoughts and conversations and being courageous with regards to your strategy. What I would say to you too is that is the intent behind the economic development strategy, that's the intent behind the investment and disinvestment, is for this council to be able to position itself to create funds so that we are not necessarily reliant on ratepayers' dollars, and to create and enable funds that are eventually ploughed back into this district and this community, which then reduces the rates burden overall because we have a different source of an income stream. And this is the next step that, you know, I'm suggesting that this council needs to start to take, so that we start to look for other options and we start to look for those investment opportunities, because otherwise if we don't, then we're going to continue to have these conversations every 3 years and an annual plan about potentially wanting to kick the can down the road because we want to keep rates low.
I can see the kicking the can down the road, but there's always been this premise: let's attract many ratepayers to our district, because the more ratepayers we have, the more rates we collect, the more it can be shared over a whole range of people. The flip side of that is you attract more people, you've got to provide level of service to accommodate those people. That's an increase in costs. So you've got to look at both sides of the coin as to, you know, what is the stable or the appropriate level of our borrowing, you might say, with regards to our population and our assets, because we're borrowing against our assets from the bank's perspective for our level of service, and it has to be capped so we don't actually go, you know, rogue. So as that part of it, you know, I mean, it's finding that balancing act, and to me, you just can't go up exponentially with some of these, you know, because people are going to not be able to afford to live in Selwyn, and we'll get a decrease in population.
And Deborah, that's the feedback that we're going to receive, I'm sure, and a lot of it over the next 3 or 4 months. But these rates that are here reflect the decisions that are at the front end of the document, and says if you want to have these things, and if we want to maintain the lifestyle that Selwyn offers, and if we want to think about some new things coming on board to protect our future, and if we want to continue to attract business growth, and if we want to do all these other things, then this is the dollar outcome. And so this is where the rubber hits the road and people can actually see, you know, nothing is free, and there's going to continue to need to be increasing targeted rates as well as the general rate to be able to afford the requests that we've had. And I mean, some have been brought up today, some have been brought up through previous annual and long-term plans that we've had to say no to. And even with what we've got, we're still expecting a 16% rates increase, which really, when we look through our whole document, is a holding pattern with a little bit of, we've got to keep stepping forward. There's not a whole lot of extravagant, lovely, nice things. If we look back 6 years ago, we had in the one long-term plan document, 8 indoor courts, Te Ara Atia, $13 million aquatic centre extension, things on this building, the health hub, so 2 $20 million builds, I think 2 $13 or $14 million builds in there. We're not talking about any of that stuff now. So it's quite a different landscape that we're in, and I think our long-term plan now reflects that different landscape. But you're certainly correct that we're going to, this puts pressure on many in our community, and I think we can expect to hear that. Grant.
I've had a fair go. I'm happy to go behind Megan if Megan wants to go first.
Actually, it wasn't Megan, it was me, but...
Okay, you didn't show up.
Well, that's the case, so you can wait, son.
I actually was up next, but I lost my light.
You go, mate.
So looking at that, the chart there, and I'm going, you know, it's a pretty amazing chart, because I don't know some of these famous financial people over here, they'll know the documents I'm talking about. But things are meant to double every 7 to 10 years. There's not many of those things on there that double within 7 to 10 years. In fact, some of them, I think, are being held quite low, and so they're quite restrained. I look at the organic bin rate is going to be $190. We're projecting that for the next 10 years. That's pretty amazing. There's going to be no increase in the organic bin rate for the next 10 years. So I think that on the other side, I think this is restrained. I think this is showing this is how costs how costs grow. I think this is lowballing it. So yes, there are going to be, of course, there's going to be increases. People's houses are going to increase. They're going to double in price in the next 7 to 10 years. The things that we're going to be paying for are going to double in price in the next 7 to 10 years. But there's not a lot of things on there that are doubled in the next 10 years.
There's a couple of things that points out, and just reflecting on, I think, a slide we had at the last workshop around the proportionality of general rate increases, how it disproportionately affects rural ratepayers. And our growth is largely driven by urban growth, but our rural ratepayers are really hammering the burden of it, and that's a real challenge for us. So I guess we all need to be aware that whilst these urban improvements are all going on the mortgage, unfortunately our rural community is paying a disproportionate share of that mortgage, and that's pretty challenging for our rural communities. And that brings me on to the second topic, which Murray England is just waiting for me to ask. Yes. What are you doing about water races, Murray? Because and why isn't it in this LTP, Murray? Because using the average 150 hectare farm in Selwyn, he's going to be paying around about $7,000 in water race rates that he doesn't want, doesn't use, and can't put a stock on it because his farm environment plan says you can't have stock in the cloven feet in water races. And as a team, I think we've repeatedly promised we would address water races, and have a future network in this LTP and put it out for consultation, and I don't see it in this LTP. As a compliment, Murray.
Is that on the chin? Or?
So I've got another question, but I'll leave Murray to answer that one perhaps first.
Thanks for that question.
Crikey, well, that's a good question, Grant. It's probably not an easy one to answer. We could harmonise those rates, but we haven't done that. I think the reason why that wasn't, because while these budgets were pulled together and the finances were pulled together quite some time ago, we were looking down the barrel of water reform and what was in, what was out. There's some certainty over that now, but still a wee bit of uncertainty. But one way forward, which may have to be bumped now to the annual plan, would be to harmonise the rates across water races, land drainage and stormwater. So stormwater was one that would have been pulled with the reform. And harmonising the rates across those three disciplines would bring the rates significantly down for those rural users. So the math is not hard, so we could do that, but whether now is the time in the LTP cycle, not sure.
I think the question you're avoiding, Murray, is the fact that we've got a residual network in the draw here at Selwyn. We've talked about putting it in place for, I think, 3 LTP cycles. We haven't got a water race committee as a ginger group anymore, and it's just sitting in the bottom drawer not being done. So I guess I'm advocating for some substantive work on that for our rural community, because they're going to face the brunt of this general rate increase. They're going to be paying a hell of a lot more rates for urban growth. And they're saying, well, hang on a minute, we've been asking you for 9 years to give us a bit of a hand here, and there's nothing coming back. So I think, really as a team, we're not delivering for our rural community because we're asking a lot of them, but we're not giving much back.
Just on those water races again, so the Upper Ellesmere water race closure is one that we have moved on. So there's a 4-year program where those races will be shut down. So that has been consulted on, and the community is open and understands that process. So I suppose council could give us direction and say, actually, we don't want water races anymore, and we will shut down to that strategic races. If that is the approach, then we could go out for consultation on that matter outside the LTP now, and as a specific consultation. But remembering, of course, there are other benefits to water races, not just for stock. And there, of course, are users who do, in fact, want the water races.
Murray, you're a friend of mine, and I regard you as that, but that's a load of trollop, because you've been given clear direction, not you, that the council has given clear direction that we move to the residual network repeatedly. And while I don't say that lightly, I got to call it out, mate. And it's not a reflection on you personally, it's just the council. So will I move on to my second question, Mr. Mayor?
Yes, please.
Yeah. A thought occurred to me when I was seeing the rating increases, and I think I know the answer, but I'd like it articulated in a meeting around the way we calculate our rates increases, and just putting a nice little example up. When you see the numbers of, say, 25% rates increase, 15 and 11, mentally, most ratepayers put that together and go, oh, it's a 40% rates increase, and let's use a denominator of $1,000. They go, in 4 years' time, I'm going to be paying $1,400. I'm assuming that we're using compounding rates, so that it's year one, you start with a factor of 1, and it's 1.25, and then the next year it's another 15% on the 1.25. So in year 4, rather than a 40% increase, you're actually looking at around a 55% increase due to the compounding effect. That's just loose numbers, but can that be articulated in an open meeting that that is the way we're doing it? It is not, as the ratepayers believe, in 3 years' time I'm going to be paying 40% more. It's actually a compounding effect.
Yeah, the way you describe that, Grant, is correct. So
the answer is yes. So
yes.
while 40% seems bad enough in today's dollars, it's substantial. So that's the second point. Sharon, if I was to put my best Nicola Willis impression on and say, as a governor, that's great, but I want you to bring me another 7.5% cuts, how would you respond to that request?
I was going to do that without the microphone there. At the
Don't
end,
do that without me asking. That's great.
no, you're not that lucky, Grant. In terms of if councillors make a decision that they wish to direct the CEO following the consultation to come back with particular percentage of cost savings, then I anticipate that the governors will give me that decision and that guidance, and that is something that we will look at and bring back as to what would have to change. Obviously, as we've talked before, that is absolutely around that operational, and that generally means to gain the most effect, it would be a reduction of FTE, and that usually equates to, if we want to reduce FTE, then that means that we would close particular centres and libraries, because that's where the main bulk of operational expenditure comes from, is operationally associated costs. So to get the gains of that, you need to reduce FTE. You don't get it through cutting half day here and a half day there. If you actually want the genuine dollars, then that means that facilities have to close and staff have to go, and then we would factor in redundancy costs associated with that. And I would probably be in the spirit of being a CEO, I would come back and present to you what, if governors asked me to do that, and I might even be so bold as to give a recommendation that it wouldn't be my recommendation to do that. But at the end of the day, I work for you, and governors give the CEO direction.
I guess fair warning, that may be something that comes your direction.
As long as it comes with a bottle of wine, that's okay.
The last thing, I suppose, and I brought it up with Murray, I was quite concerned to see the significant increases in metered water per cubic metre, and whilst Murray made me feel a bit more comfortable that while the percentage increases were high, the relative dollar value was relatively low. And whilst to be fair, I'm pretty on the right of the spectrum on some things, I just think particularly water is a fundamental thing in our lives. We should really aspire to be delivering it to our ratepayers at the lowest possible cost, covering our costs. But and I know there's been an element with water metering of demand management, and I just don't want to see the pricing to the detriment of our community be around demand management rather than providing a quality service at an affordable price.
Thanks, Grant. Shane.
Kia ora, Sam. Thank you. I guess I wanted to start by just commending the team, Chair, your team and staff. I don't know if I've already done that, but we spoke last week about your efforts and staff's efforts over the holiday period to roll up sleeves and be a part of the organisation over that period. And I just wanted to thank staff for the work that's been brought back to us, and also commend Lisa on the people budgets. We discussed that you've done a really good job of providing rigour through this budget, and also looked at ways of self-funding. A question around that is the investment into the digital enhancement or digital investment, with the not so much intention but the possibility that does reduce the need for particular FTE in different spheres, and whether the investment into the pod council infrastructure fits this addition of budget, addition of FTE. Does that match? Two, Grant brought up some really good points around rural urban divide, water rating, and also, yeah, and it was mentioned like over the period of time around what am I getting? My rates are increasing, and what am I getting? And that's really, I think, a review of that rural urban divide. It has been explained to me that it's kind of at the fairest we can get it to, but I think continuing that message for our rural community is going to be really important moving forward. Noticing the increase rates around the community centres and referring back to the people of Leaston that have been paying a community centre rate for no community centre across the district. I just wanted clarity, perhaps Alison, on the increased borrowing, and from the comments you made before that we voted to move to increase our level of borrowing. Are you saying that that increase will make no marked, potentially has a minimum impact on rating, on the rate increase? Has that benefited, how has that benefited the community?
Well, it doesn't have zero impact. It does have a cost associated with it. And I think it's worth just pointing out as well, at the last LTP, we roughly had borrowing rates of about 2.5%.
Yes.
We're now sitting at 6%.
Yes.
And you're right, at the, I think it was audit and risk or finance performance,
yes.
we did change the debt threshold from 160 up to 220, with 280 being the max. We obviously don't want to go to 280 because if rates were to drop off, then we're borderline at the point of not being able to service that debt, even with potential reductions in service levels, etc.
Yeah, and I guess around that, it's one of the things that we reflect on is the borrowing rates at a time when borrowing was really good. And I don't know whether it exists in current policy, but perhaps there is opportunity to review the need. Well, potentially it'll be part of it, the need for borrowing, but the opportunity to borrow at a lower rate when that does occur to benefit future 10-year plans. I presume that dollar graph that's part of the annual plans and long-term plans will be part of the documentation going out. Usually you have a dollar and it's got a split of 33% community and all that's going in there. Something that Grant said around a rationalisation. I'm confident that Sharon, you've assembled a team, and through your diligence over the period that you've been here, that we will by the next long-term plan, we'll look back on this period. We're governed by the clock at the moment, but I'm sure there'll be a rationalisation of what currently exists through your leadership to provide better value for money for our constituents moving forward, through the OPEX, through the divestment strategy, through the investment strategy to drive down and defer rates, which is our policy. And back to that, and sorry to you, Murray England, Deborah asked it earlier in the meeting this morning around what drives water increases, and I'm pretty sure you said it was around the renewals and maintenance costs associated. So Grant's question around that increase over the long-term plan, the percentages that we've got up there, what drives that, so I can take it back to the community.
Lots of questions here. Sharon, do you want to start?
I'll answer a couple of those, Shane. What I would say is that at each LTP cycle, this district has grown and changed a great deal over 10 years, and it's going to continue to grow and change. And that means that at each LTP cycle, we're going to have a different set of challenges, some of them good, some of them not so good. So in terms of, we will always try to be as forward thinking as possible and provide good financial stewardship as we navigate each set of evolution. The question you asked about digital, the dollar figure that we're putting and suggesting for digital, that is small fry, so to speak. And the reason is because that is to help us build the picture as to what the roadmap actually needs to be. And whether that comes through in a second annual plan cycle or it comes through in the next long-term plan cycle, the reality of it is that we don't have a digital environment that is lends itself to a modern and contemporary organisation. So therefore, we're very manually orientated. So initially, until we get the larger investments, and part of Matt's role is to bring forward a roadmap and a business case as to the kind of investment that's needed, whether we have shared service opportunities, etc. There is going to be a time lag to having one, that business case approved, and two, having any new digital technology implemented. So the reality of it is it's probably going to be 5 years before we would see any shift in FTE, because we simply don't have the technology to enable that at this moment in time. And in terms of HQ, yes, our thoughts are very much around the additional staff that are being brought on. But currently, as it exists now, work was undertaken to move to open plan to try and fit everybody in. Not everybody can be fitted in. So what we have now is a working from home policy, which means at any given time, on every, we've got at least staff working from home 2 days a week. And COVID, new environment, new different ways of working. But I would also actually like us to have the capability to have as many people together, because that's how you build a team. If you've got those corridor conversations, if you've got people fronting and being visible to each other, and whilst we've got a different way of working through COVID, we've also got lost opportunities by not being able to house all of our team in one place. And yes, we maximise our service centres. Staff move around the different service centres. And so we're trying to maximise those opportunities. But there are some benefits and efficiencies to be gained by right-sizing the headquarters to have the right people in the right place at the right time.
The detail around the water makeup we'll deal with through another committee in the same way that we've said we'll do with the transport and the other bits that fit in there. Was there anything, Craig, that you picked up there that you want to respond to? Or Alison? No? Okay. We'll come back to that detail through the committee, so Shane. Lydia.
I had a go last week. Grant's had a go today. I'll just go on for a third time, if that's all right, Murray. Our rural people really want to see some type of change with this water race network. And, we talk about when to consultate on this. Well, I actually believe it's now, because if we don't do anything, we're looking, we talked about annual plan last week, but isn't 24-25 our first annual plan? And so if it's not now, then when actually is it? What annual plan is it? Is it, 29 and 30? And how long do these people continue to pay for something that with legislation they can't use? And I guess it just buys into the disproportionate rate increase that our rural ratepayers are forced with. And Deborah made a good point about what is breaking point for people. And I mean, for some people in some of our rural ratepayers, it's actually this long-term plan. There's some rural ratepayers that aren't particularly doing well. There's a bit of a downturn in market, and they're really struggling. And then we go and put this on the table, just kind of the straw. And so I just think that any changes that we can actually make to benefit that might help. So I'd like to see some change.
Thanks. And Murray said that will be a work stream that we can look at through into a coming up annual plan. So it's not that that work isn't going to be important, and it's been raised twice now by, it's been raised continually through some years around discussion. There's some background that Murray's done with users of the water race system as well, which I think needs to inform some of that decision making, and we need to consider in a format and form that isn't, as we pull together our LTP, because it's too nuanced to try and understand and make a decision today to fit in here. Sophie?
Yeah, I'm trying to collate my thoughts into something that makes sense. I definitely appreciate what people are saying about reducing the burden on residents. And I say residents because when we say ratepayers, it implies that it's just the people who receive a rate bill, whereas we have an awful lot of renters and people who live in that sort of accommodation who they have a right to say something as well. They will pay for those rates through their rent or whatever else. So on that hand, I appreciate, you know, I can appreciate that sort of conversation, but at the same time, I also appreciate seeing figures that tell me realistically what we need to be paying if we're actually going to be getting what we have been asked for in the past, what we have discussed at many times during the last few years. This is what it costs. It's really weird to have conversations about all these things, and then suddenly when you see the bill, you go, oh no, it's like putting everything on lay-by and being surprised by the total at the end. I mean, just personally, looking at those figures, I accept that 5% of my household income is going to be going on rates. I pay probably the same amount or more on insurances, and I don't see anything back from that year on year unless I get burgled or have an accident, whereas I see everything that we pay for through rates every single day. Also, I have seen austerity in action, and it is not fun, and I generally suggest that nobody here would enjoy it if councils here started applying that as a deliberate policy as well. But in terms of the water races part, I don't know whether it's worth waiting. You know, we were fishing around potentially for another big decision. Is that something that we want to invite as a fourth? Possibly not. But the only thing I wanted to, like, I get that it's a conversation to be had, but the water races only exist because the farmers needed them in the first place. That isn't what the environment originally looked like. The economy is literally a wholly owned subsidiary of the environment. I think Simon Upton said that again recently. And yeah, I get no say on what people do with those water races or why it is that they have to fence them off, why that is their style of farming. But I do know that by the end of this LTP period, I'll be paying at least $200 a year towards land drainage and water race as a public good rate. And I get nothing for that, whereas a farmer can. They bought the land with that water race in there. It's not up to me what decisions they've made for the reasons why suddenly they want to suddenly go, oh, actually, I don't need that anymore. Anyway, thanks.
I was going to say that, and forgive me, but I'm not up to speed on the full water race conversation. What I would say to you is that as the CE, I'm committed to ensuring that Tim and Murray and the team actually bring some comprehensive papers through so that we can have a fully informed discussion and a clear plan and guidance from you as councillors between now and the next annual plan, so that we understand the consequences, the benefits and the risks, and develop a pathway forward. And that will be put into a work programme to make sure that happens.
Thanks. I guess we won't probably throw Tim Mason into the deep end, and he's not here conveniently. I think I may have raised this in a recent week, but I want to raise it again. There are other council facilities around the country that have been jointly funded for the build, where the community have had an opportunity for different constituents to donate money towards the build. Do we have an existing policy or strategy on this? Is this something we could look into? There are a number of people who do have a bit of money, old money, in our district, and it would be an opportunity to at least see if we could explore that going forward, because I think, yeah, it'd be great if we could at least, you know, consider that type of partnership. We're talking about having partnerships.
In Mark Riker's absence, I think, I understand that he did raise at a previous meeting that that there were some active discussions with developers taking place around Rolleston about the opportunities for just exactly what you described, some contribution in kind towards a facility. We've certainly looking at actively looking at sponsorship in terms of our facilities. It would be fair to say that the progress to date has been limited. We've only been doing it actively for the last 6 months, and we're still to develop up a sponsorship strategy. But the feedback that we've got to date has been that the sponsors are more likely to support in a particular an event or a particular program or activity, rather than put a name on a room in a building. But also just touching on that, the investment, the economic development strategy is potentially going to explore opportunities for philanthropic investment in a more strategic way. That still sits on the table. So we're certainly not discounting that as an option going forward. So we're actively exploring those various areas.
Thank you, Megan.
I just wanted to say thank you for agreeing to do work on water races. It's really challenging to sit here and talk about water in our natural environment and to bring to the conversation the only way I've ever been able to think about it and through a kaitiakitanga lens. So it's challenging to sit here and talk about a resource from a financial perspective, those who have gained from it and those who must pay for it, knowing that there are legacy issues that will continue from land use that impacts on Te Waihora. So I wanted to just say, when that conversation comes through, could it also include, and I'm expecting it will, that type of thinking and how it threads into the One Water strategy moving forward? Thank you.
Absolutely, it will.
Grant.
Just a small one. I think Elizabeth might have brought it up at the last meeting on page 33. I just think for our ratepayers, try and avoid the acronyms. You've got ETL, then ELT, and FTEs. I just think if for ratepayers, I just need to know what that refers to.
Thanks, Grant. And yes, when we'll make it fit for community consumption.
Yeah. On page 36, I think we were higher cost of borrowing adding to the increased debt balance, 2.5 versus 6%. Just for clarity, is our current average cost of funds 6% now?
Yes.
So our hedge and swap portfolio hasn't been hedged far enough forward to give us the benefits of that lower interest rate environment?
No, the current average is sitting around 3% due to our swaps.
Yeah.
And then the most recent swap we took out was about just under 4%. So that's all what we were sitting. Floating rate debt's sort of 6.4%, but we're taking out the floating rate debt and fixing it through swaps at sort of 4%.
I think it's sort of the comment you made that the costs of debt are a relatively small component of the rates, but we're seeing the challenges that Christchurch City is seeing from a large debt portfolio, which has a significant interest rate increase and not protected by hedges, or just the hedges run out. And I guess our debt trend at Selwyn is heading that way, where we're going to have significant debt levels. And we've come from a low zero debt environment to having a significant debt portfolio, which needs active management. And I think probably the idea that putting it on the mortgage is not going to cost us much probably might be an outdated idea. There's a significant cost to our business. I won't respond to that one. Thank you. I'll leave it.
Okay, Lydia.
Sorry, I forgot to ask this one before. It was just under new opportunities. I was wondering if you could give me some clarification on a few points on there around bulk water extraction, bin deliveries, and land use rents.
So I can definitely talk to bulk water extraction. So through new legislation requirements on Te Mata Arawai, we can no longer take water from hydrants. So we moved to bulk extraction locations. So there's a number spread out across the district. At this point, we're not charging for that water because we want to encourage contractors to use it and move away from the hydrants, which cause us a risk to our network. But going forward in the LTP, we can't be affording to provide free water. So we need to charge for that. So that cost, no doubt, will be charged. Well, we charge to the tanking company, and that'll be on charge to the user. So if it's whether it's filling up a farm tank or if it's going to be dust suppression on a road construction, those costs will be recovered through that. And sorry, I missed the other two questions. Are they for me?
Bin deliveries and land use rents.
So this, I can only assume Andrew's. Oh, Andrew is no longer here. But I assume it's when a new person wants a bin that gets delivered, there may be a charge for that. I can only assume. We can come follow that. It is for that, yep. And I'm not sure about the third question, sorry. I'm not sure if there's someone else who can answer that for me.
Okay, was land use rents. I'm just wondering, like, from a community perspective, what their interpretation of that is going to be, and if there's going to be any comms around that.
I think that's been, I don't know, Sharon might have an answer to that, but to me that has been, when I've asked a similar question, it's been around having a rate that's actually a market rate for the amount of land that's been available through the pit rent, and at the moment maybe our pricing is too low for what's there, so there's an opportunity to lift our increase there.
So Lydia, those new opportunities, we've not had the space to be able to run those to ground. And part of that is to be doing that between now and the next annual plan, because we see that there's potentially some revenue generating opportunities. But of course, as we make change, it's about making sure we get the communication right with regards to that change. And some of this is actually bringing us up to speed and on a par with charges related to other councils that we currently have limited or no charge on.
Cool, thank you.
Thanks everyone. We had a really long and deep discussion on these things, so thank you for your consideration on them and your contribution to them. My final sort of question for the group, and this is looking back on the delivering essential capital projects graph, which traditionally we've got to about $100 million worth of delivery, and we're suggesting that next year we're going to do 50% more, and then the following year do another 30% on top of that more. And not that we won't collect the dollars to make that happen, but the credibility of our council in the eyes of the community around doing the things that we say that we're going to do. So just wouldn't mind some clarity on how, like Murray, I know you've spread that out, so we're not going to catch it up in 1 year. The carry forward's now over 3 years. To me, it just looks like a little bit dreamland that we'll be able to actually do that. Like, do you think we can do it in 3 years? Or should that, is there room to make that happen over 5 or 6 and then actually deliver the things in the timing that we say we're going to?
Yeah, so there's two purposes for that. The first purpose was to say, let's not put anything else in the first, second or third year of the LTP. If councils are the mind to add additional projects, they need to be out into the longer time frame. The second part was to be transparent that there has been some flattening off of delivery. Of course, we have had COVID, we've had the restructure, and there has been some lags regarding delivery because of that. As staff has been quite a bit of time pulling back the new work, so the blue bars are the new projects we're adding in there, and then spreading out the carry forward. So there's a concerted effort to reduce that carry forward amount, and so that will take the burden off those first 3 years. Through the restructure, additional 2 FTEs in the, well, actually, I'm not sure exactly how many additional FTEs, but there's 2 current vacant positions in the capital works team. And then in terms of new FTEs coming forward into the first year of the LTP, there's additional 2. So that's 4 FTEs in addition to do that. There's a whole range of things we're doing to accelerate work and to make sure that program is deliverable. So, yes, comfortable with that.
Yeah, and that's one of the focuses I have as CE is around our capital works, and that's where Tim Mason will have a focus, because we have to be able to do what we say we're going to do and demonstrate that to the community, and we probably haven't done that effectively to date.
Thank you. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the conversation on those matters. While 1 or 2 things were raised, I didn't hear, there was no one saying make this a big decision at the front and shift stuff around massively. Are we comfortable that the matters that are the big decisions, as we've got them without chlorination, are the ones that will go out to the community, and everything else will be included in the document, but not in that upfront space? Deborah?
With what Grant said, I think that if we've got a ticket item over 5-6 million, right, and it's a new project, I think it should be up the front, and we need to be transparent about it. And that goes for all the others. Also, I'll be up front, increase in the Lincoln Town Centre master plan for up to 20 million. We've got to find extra to actually deliver on that full program. And I think we probably need a sentence to our community along the lines of delaying capital works projects. This is the impact, and just showing an example, right, of what can happen, because everybody is still expecting in Lincoln for that project to actually happen, start, you know, and you know, nothing has happened apart from the road repairs.
So I think that was captured in the conversation earlier that there will be added detail around that particular project. I'm not sure if we were to have every project over $5 million as a major decision, the document would be massive. And we haven't done that work to be able to give that to the auditors now. So we just won't be able to do that.
I meant new, if there's new projects that you're expecting, it doesn't matter where you find the funding, because that would be the savings, but to be upfront, this, you know, 10 million for the cycleway project, right? If it's one single project, it has to be looked at surely as a capital project that needs to be reported to, or is it actually sort of like a mixture of operational and mixed in with footpaths and cycleways? So it's not a specific new project, it's mixed in with all the other aspirational cycleways that Shane's mentioned around Lake Waihora as well, because these all need to be funded as
Sure. Oh,
That's
Andrew?
good. Andrew, do you want to talk to that?
Yep. I think it may be worthwhile because it is obviously a topic of hot interest in regards to the Lincoln Town Centre. And if it helps, if I can just provide a little bit of a brief explanation of where we're at and how we got there. So the Lincoln Town Centre plan back in 2016 produced estimates to upgrade Gerald Street essentially from one end to the other. In the last LTP, that was priced at around $21 million to get from one end to the other. With the work that was done with the Rolleston Town Centre and the type of level of service we were providing there and the type of amenity that was provided, which we wanted to replicate for Lincoln, we revised our estimates based on the learnings from that project. And that is how we've come to the $46 million. The project is staged from one end of Lincoln to the other, starting with the existing town centre, moving through the sort of midsection, ending up at the university. It includes traffic signals to cater for the growth that we need to cater for in that regard, such as at Westbelt, Vernon Drive, and Springs Road, and also Birches Road. So there's been a complicating factor in terms of needing to dial in that aspect in recent times. I think it would be fair to say that the aspirations for the town centre upgrade are that of creating a relatively high amenity outcome and including the provision of the on-road cycle lanes. The fact that we have a carriageway that is currently failing at the moment and we have overdue renewals in terms of curb and channel and footpaths and things like that, we are faced with having to do anyway. And so essentially we're going to have to dig up the whole road from one side to the other and do it all as one. But the point being is that we can add value at that time to create the amenity, which is reflected in the cost that we have produced. And we have certainly staged it in regards to your comments earlier. We know that we're going to do this section and over those couple of years and then follow on and do that section over the next and try and bring it all together.
Andrew, sorry, it's good to have that context, and I think we know that it's going to be in the plan that goes out for consultation, and I'm hearing that I guess the complexity of some of these projects is that we want more detail in what goes to our community. So it's not actually necessarily whether they're a big decision or not. It's actually, can we just have some more detail so that the community can understand some of those things? And the cycleway and Lincoln Town Centre have been the two that have been raised here, and so on those two particularly, can that have a little bit more thought from the team?
And we've committed to expanding on the narrative, and that's what we'll do between the draft consultation document coming back on the 26th of March.
Great.
But be assured we have all that detail sitting behind these high level numbers that can be explained further by the wider team. So we're very happy to do that.
Thank you. Elizabeth.
Sophie and I both really appreciated the slide, the detail of information and the way that it was really simplified in the slide for the chlorination, which is now being moved across. I'm just curious as to whether that information in the slide and the way it was presented can be retained, even though we're taking it out of, but not in the way that it appears now on this form, but the way it was in the slide, because we've got a lot of people, dyslexia, et cetera, and they prefer the more succinct, easy to read, easy to find information packs. And I just feel like, if we produce it as we get it in our agendas, it's very wordy, very heavy, very difficult for people who aren't in the system to grasp.
So previously we've done a range of different consultation items that people can engage with. So some of that's online, some of that's been printed, some of it's been fat and thick and detailed, and some of it's been light and topic based and picture focused. So I'd be just keen to hear from the team, is that a similar approach that we're going to take this year?
Yeah, I think in terms of the development of the consultation document, we can take those things on board. So this isn't the consultation document. A lot of the stuff will be moved across into the consultation document, but we can add some more context. We can add some more pictures. We can, and we'll get some feedback on that as well before we exit finalised. So certainly we're flexible and open in terms of how we develop that document.
And one of the workshops will be about show and tell in that document with the understanding about what the comms are, I think as Jenny alluded to before.
Thank you. Megan.
I just wanted to say that I endorse how it's currently going to go out and be presented, and the big decisions and where things fit, and to help me feel confident with that decision. I look back on the last long-term plan, and because Samuel asked, is there anything in here that we're missing? And if it's been covered in a last long-term plan, I don't see it as missing. What I see it as instead is that we're kind of jumping the gun a little bit to go on the 26th of March. There's going to be a consultation document that will come back, and I will anticipate that it will have some type of progress since our last long-term plan component to it. And to also make me feel really comfortable that we're only bringing these decisions through as the big decisions and not everything, is I've gone back and I've looked over the last 3 years of consultation documents, including the annual plan, the annual report, and the budgets that go out, and we have continuously provided information on this. So even though I am new, I'm comfortable because I've looked into that. So thank you.
Thank you, Megan. Shane.
My very last, and it's going to bug me if I don't ask, but the big decision too, I think that providing rack and ride facilities is critical to the growth, and it's obviously been identified for a long time in the Greater Christchurch Plan. Option 1, to proceed only if receives co-funding. I wonder if there's a linkage to the town, Lincoln Town Centre development, if there is a linkage, and you don't have to answer this stuff now. And the second question is there scope within the revision of community DCs to fill a gap in this type of facility?
Great, we'll follow up with those after the meeting. Thank you. That brings us to the end of today's workshop. Councillors, if you could stay for another about 10 minutes